Hello there, and welcome to Just About Earth, where curiosity has a way of getting comfortable and science takes its time. Never hurrying, never pushing, just wandering through ideas at a pace that lets your mind settle. Tonight, we're not watching the hands of a clock or following the movements of stars across the night sky, but stepping into a landscape that is both familiar and almost alien. A place shaped by ice, where colossal creatures once roamed, where predators larger than any alive today prowled through snow-laden forests, and where humans, not yet spread across the entire world, walked among them. This is the world of the Ice Age, a chapter of Earth's story when cold was not a season but a constant presence, and survival demanded strength, fur, tusks, teamwork, and sometimes sheer luck. Take a moment and think about where you're listening from right now. Maybe it's warm where you are, maybe you've pulled a blanket over yourself, or maybe you're hearing this in the quiet of a room just before sleep. Imagine, though, that instead of the comfort of your own space, the air around you is freezing, your breath curling into clouds in front of you, the horizon dominated by glaciers that stretch farther than sight. That was the daily backdrop for so many creatures of the Pleistocene epoch, the geological age we casually call the Ice Age. It's easy to picture it as one endless winter, but in truth it was a world of change, where massive ice sheets advanced and retreated over tens of thousands of years, reshaping continents and guiding the destinies of animals and people alike. Before we sink fully into the details of those animals, I'll ask you a small question, the kind I like to ask because it makes all this a little more personal. Where are you right now? What does the air feel like around you? Are you in the middle of your day or slowly unwinding in the evening? These questions might seem simple, but they connect us to the idea that the Ice Age wasn't just an abstract period millions of years ago. It was real, lived time, and for humans like us, it was the world they breathed in, the ground they walked across, the skies they looked up at, the dangers they prepared for. When we imagine it closely, we step a little nearer to the lives of those who were there. And if you find this slow walk through the Ice Age to be soothing or simply a welcome distraction from the faster pace of your day, it would mean a lot if you gave this a like or maybe even subscribed. It helps bring more people into this space, people who might also want to trade the noise of the present for a quiet journey through the past. Now let's ease into that world. Picture a land where the horizon seems endless, because the forests are sparse and the open tundra stretches on. Herds of animals gather, some so large that their silhouettes are etched into memory, the way a mountain's shape lingers after you've seen it once. The cold shapes every decision. What to eat, where to move, when to rest, how to raise young. The very rhythm of life is defined not by 4 neat seasons, but by a cycle of glaciation that lasted millennia. During the height of the last glacial maximum, which peaked about 20,000 years ago, nearly a third of Earth's surface was under ice. In North America, glaciers covered all of Canada and reached down into what is now the northern United States. In Europe, they stretched across Scandinavia and down into Germany. Even oceans changed. So much water was locked away in frozen sheets that sea levels fell dramatically, exposing land bridges. What we know as the Bering Strait today was once dry land, a vast corridor connecting Asia to North America, and it became a highway for animals and eventually humans. That setting wasn't empty. It was filled with creatures that in many ways feel mythic to us now, yet they were as real and common in their time as deer, bison or wolves are today. Think about mammoths walking in long lines across snowy plains, their shaggy coats moving with the wind, tusks curving like ivory crescents. Imagine saber-toothed cats crouching low in tall frozen grasses, muscles coiled as they prepare to strike at prey much larger than themselves. Picture giant ground sloths, taller than any human could imagine, pulling down tree branches with claws so long they might look like scythes. These animals weren't fantasy. They were part of ecosystems that thrived under conditions we would find unbearable. What makes this time so captivating isn't just the size of the animals, though size does capture attention. It's the variety and the adaptations they develop to endure. Some evolved thick coats, dense fat layers, and tusks or antlers that could serve as tools as much as weapons. Others relied on speed, stealth, or sheer numbers to survive. Predators grew massive because their prey was massive. The balance was delicate, yet it held together across continents, across climates that swung between bitter cold and brief warming intervals. For humans entering this world, every encounter was both a risk and a possibility. Mammoths could provide food, clothing, shelter, and tools. But they could also crush a person with a single charge. Saber-toothed cats might stalk the same herds humans depended on. Dire wolves might have watched camps from a distance, waiting for scraps or for weakness. The Ice Age wasn't simply a world of beasts. It was a stage where our species learned resilience, strategy, and cooperation, tested against some of the fiercest conditions and creatures Earth has ever produced. When you think about the Ice Age, it's tempting to focus only on the cold. But there was more. There were grasslands that bloomed in the brief summers, forests that stretched in pockets of warmer regions, rivers that carved through frozen soil, carrying meltwater away from glaciers. Life found ways to adapt in every niche. Even the creatures that seem improbable, like giant beavers or armadillo-like glyptodons, weren't oddities to their neighbours. They were part of the ordinary rhythm of that world. The extraordinary was everyday life. This is where our journey begins, not with one creature, but with the stage itself. A frozen Earth, reshaped again and again by ice, by advancing and retreating glaciers, by climates that tipped back and forth between extremes. It's a world both distant and familiar, because the bones of it still lie beneath our feet. Many of the landscapes we know today were carved by that ice, valleys and lakes and coastlines traced by glaciers that melted long ago. To understand the beasts of the Ice Age, we start here, in the cold, in the sound of ice creaking and cracking, in the image of vast herds moving across open plains, in the shadow of predators that tested every boundary of survival. And with that foundation set, we can start looking more closely at the lives of those creatures, one by one, as they move through a time when the world itself seemed locked in winter, yet teeming with life. When we picture the Ice Age, it's easy to think of it as one long frozen stretch of time, but the truth is more complicated. The Earth wasn't suddenly plunged into ice and left there in stillness. Instead, the planet shifted slowly, again and again, into cycles of cooling and warming. The period most people mean when they say the Ice Age is the Pleistocene epoch, which began about 2.5 million years ago and ended roughly 11,500 years ago. Within those millions of years, glaciers advanced and retreated many times. Each advance brought colder temperatures and the spread of vast ice sheets, and each retreat gave way to milder climates where forests and grasslands spread back across the continents. It was a rhythm of extremes, and in the middle of it all, animals and humans had to find ways to endure. The coming of the cold wasn't random. Earth's climate dances to a complicated tune, driven by changes in its orbit and tilt, by the way sunlight strikes its surface, by the carbon in the atmosphere, and by the restless currents of the oceans. Scientists call the main driver the Milankovitch cycles, named after a Serbian mathematician who worked out how slight wobbles in Earth's orbit could lead to large swings in climate. Over tens of thousands of years, the angle of Earth's tilt changes slightly. The shape of its orbit stretches or tightens, and its axis wobbles like a slow-spinning top. On their own, these shifts are subtle, but they affect how much sunlight different parts of the Earth receive. Less sunlight means cooler summers, which means snow and ice from winter don't melt fully, and over time, ice builds up into sheets that can cover continents. Once those glaciers grow, they start reinforcing the cold. Ice reflects sunlight better than bare ground or ocean water. The more ice there is, the more sunlight is bounced back into space, and the cooler the planet becomes. Wind patterns shift, ocean currents change, and ecosystems everywhere feel the effects. What might start as a few degrees of cooling cascades into a world reshaped. Deserts expand in some places, grasslands dominate in others, and in the far north and south, kilometres thick walls of ice creep across the land. If you were alive at the start of one of these cooling periods, you might not even notice the change in your lifetime. The average temperature might only drop slightly, the winters might seem a little harsher, the summers shorter. It wasn't like a disaster movie where an ice storm sweeps in overnight. It was gradual, generation by generation. But across centuries, the difference became unmistakable. Rivers froze longer, forests thinned, animals migrated, and what had once been fertile land turned into tundra. The advance of glaciers reshaped the land in ways we can still see today. Entire mountain ranges were carved by the movement of ice. Valleys were widened and deepened. Rocks were ground into fine powder that winds carried across continents, leaving behind thick layers of fertile soil. Lakes were gouged out, some of which still exist as the Great Lakes in North America. Coastlines looked different because so much water was locked in ice sheets that sea levels dropped more than 100 metres. Land that is now submerged was once dry ground. Australia was connected to New Guinea. Britain was linked to mainland Europe. Alaska was joined to Siberia by a wide land bridge across what is now the Bering Strait. These connections allowed animals and humans to move into new territories, carrying with them genes, tools, and stories that would shape the course of history. The colder climate didn't mean life disappeared. It meant life adapted. Plants shrank closer to the ground, hugging warmth from the soil and resisting the biting winds. Grasses spread widely, covering huge areas in what scientists call the mammoth steppe, an ecosystem that stretched from Western Europe, across Siberia, and into North America. This steppe wasn't barren. It was one of the most productive grasslands the Earth has ever seen, supporting herds of enormous grazers, mammoths, woolly rhinoceroses, bison, horses and reindeer all thrived there, feeding on tough grasses that somehow found a way to grow even in thin soils under cold skies. Predators followed, because wherever there are herds there are hunters. Saber-toothed cats, cave lions, dire wolves and hyenas stalk these plains, their survival tied directly to the fortunes of the grazers. Further south, where the ice never reached, forests and savannas offered refuge for other species. The cold shaped even these regions indirectly. Rainfall patterns changed, rivers shifted courses, deserts grew in some areas and shrank in others. Entire ecosystems rearranged themselves in response to the cold's reach. The Ice Age wasn't just about frozen wastelands, it was about the redistribution of life across the entire planet. For humans, the coming of the cold was both a challenge and an opportunity. Our earliest ancestors had already learned to walk upright and use simple tools long before the Pleistocene began. But the pressure of changing climates pushed them to adapt further. Fire became not just useful but essential. Clothing, first in the form of animal skins, became more than comfort. It was survival. Groups had to cooperate to bring down large animals or to share resources during lean winters. Caves and shelters provided protection from storms and predators, and with time, humans began leaving marks on those cave walls that told stories, recorded hunts, or simply expressed something deeper than survival. The cold also opened new pathways. When sea levels dropped, the Bering Land Bridge became a vital route for humans moving from Asia into North America. Without the Ice Age lowering those seas, the peopling of the Americas might have unfolded very differently, or perhaps not at all until much later. In this way, the cold shaped not just landscapes and animals, but human history itself. It's worth pausing to think about how resilient life is in the face of such shifts. Imagine being a woolly mammoth calf born into a herd that migrates across hundreds of miles of tundra. From your very first breath, the cold is the background to everything. You feel it in the air, you see it in the endless snow, you taste it in the frozen grasses you learn to eat. Your life is possible only because your species has adapted thick fur, layers of fat, and tusks that help push aside snow to find food beneath. For predators, the cold demands strength and cunning. Hunting in snow takes more energy. Prey can be lost in whiteout storms. Packs and prides become vital, with individuals relying on the group to bring down animals much larger than themselves. For humans, the cold presses every skill to the limit. A failed hunt can mean hunger. A broken spear can mean danger. Yet time after time, both animals and people found ways to persist. The coming of the cold also meant extinctions. Not every creature could keep pace with the changes. Species that had thrived in warmer periods sometimes disappeared as glaciers advanced, their ranges shrinking until there was nowhere left to go. The fossil record shows these losses, but it also shows replacements. Where one species faded, another took its place, better suited to the new conditions. Evolution didn't stop for the Ice Age. It raced ahead, testing forms and behaviours, keeping what worked, discarding what didn't. As glaciers grew, the Earth itself seemed to breathe differently. Carbon dioxide levels fell, partly because colder oceans absorbed more of it, and partly because vegetation patterns shifted. The lower greenhouse gas levels reinforced the chill, deepening the freeze. Volcanoes sometimes interrupted, belching ash and gases that could warm or cool the climate temporarily, but the overall direction remained toward ice. This balance of forces created the world we call the Ice Age, a world not of sudden catastrophe, but of steady, grinding change that shaped every living thing. If you stood on the edge of one of those ice sheets, what would you see? The glacier itself wasn't just a static block of ice. It was alive in its own slow way, flowing outward under its own weight, creaking and cracking, carrying with it boulders and soil. The edge of the glacier would be a place of constant transformation, where meltwater carved channels and deposited gravel, where chunks of ice broke off and tumbled into rivers. In the summers, brief though they were, plants would push up in front of the ice, colonizing the raw land newly exposed. Behind them, animals followed, grazing and browsing, and behind the animals came hunters, human and otherwise. The margin of the ice was both a boundary and a frontier, always moving, always reshaping the land. When we think about the coming of the cold, we have to remember it wasn't a single story, but many. In some regions, the cold meant the spread of vast grasslands rich in life. In others, it meant deserts expanding, forests retreating, and species shifting to find refuge. For the Arctic and Antarctic, it meant sheets of ice thousands of meters thick, pressing down on the land so heavily that even today, long after the ice has melted, the ground is still slowly rebounding upward. The cold reached into every corner of the globe, directly or indirectly, tying together the fates of mammoths, humans, birds, fish, and even plants. This was the stage on which the great beast ruled. Without the cold, there would have been no woolly mammoth, no saber-toothed cat, no dire wolf. Their forms were answers to the questions the climate asked. How do you survive hunger when snow covers the ground? You grow tusks to dig. How do you take down prey twice your size in slippery frozen terrain? You grow in packs, coordinate and strike together. How do you cross frozen rivers or withstand nights when temperatures plunge far below freezing? You grow fur so thick it shelters calves at your side. The cold shaped not just the environment, but the very bodies and behaviours of the creatures that lived in it. And so the world entered into this long era of ice, a time of challenges and marvels. With glaciers advancing, seas retreating, and ecosystems reorganizing, the great age of beasts began. The ones we remember today, the mammoths, the saber-toothed cats, the dire wolves, the giant sloths, were not anomalies. They were perfectly suited to the frozen earth they inherited. As the cold deepened and spread, their reign truly began, and with it, the unforgettable drama of survival on an icebound planet. Among all the animals that lived during the Ice Age, none stand out in the imagination quite as vividly as the mammoth. When people picture that frozen world, it is usually the image of a woolly mammoth that comes to mind first. a towering beast draped in thick shaggy hair, with enormous curved tusks sweeping out from its head like ivory crescents. It feels both familiar and otherworldly. Familiar, because it so closely resembles the elephants we know today. Otherworldly, because its adaptations were tuned perfectly to an environment that no longer surrounds us. The woolly mammoth has become an icon of the Ice Age, but it wasn't alone. It was part of a broader family, a lineage of giants that spread across continents, each adapted to the conditions they faced. To begin understanding why the mammoth became so distinctive, it helps to trace where it came from. Mammoths belong to the same family as modern elephants, the Elephantidae. This family has existed for millions of years and has included dozens of different species across Africa, Europe, Asia, and the Americas. Long before the woolly mammoth appeared, there were mammoths suited to warmer climates, some that roamed the savannas and others that grazed in forests. The woolly variety, Mammothus primigenius, evolved in Siberia around 400,000 years ago, during one of the many glacial swings of the Pleistocene. From there, it spread outward into Europe and North America, following the grasslands that stretched across the mammoth steppe. Its entire body was built for cold survival. The hair that gives it its name was long and layered, with a dense undercoat beneath to trap heat. Its ears were much smaller than those of modern elephants, reducing heat loss and frostbite, while its tail was also short for the same reason. The hump on its back wasn't just a feature of fat and muscle, but a vital energy reserve storing fat much like a camel's hump. The most striking feature, the tusks, could reach more than 4 meters in length, curving in dramatic spirals. These weren't just for show, they were tools for clearing snow away from grasses, for fighting rivals, and for defending against predators. Life in the mammoth herds revolved around these adaptations. Herds moved in groups much like modern elephants, led often by an older female who guided the group's movements. They roamed across vast distances in search of food, grazing on grasses, sedges and small shrubs that grew even in cold conditions. Imagine standing on a steppe with the sound of crunching snow under hundreds of mammoth feet, the steam of their breath rising in the morning air, calves huddled close to their mothers for warmth. The scale alone would have been overwhelming to human eyes. For early humans, the sight of such herds must have been both inspiring and intimidating. The woolly mammoth was not the only mammoth of the Ice Age, though. Close relatives included the Columbian mammoth, Mammothus columbi, which roamed much further south, across North America, down into Mexico. The Columbian mammoth was larger than its woolly cousin, standing up to 4 meters tall at the shoulder. Unlike the woolly mammoth, it had far less hair, since it lived in more temperate climates. Where the ranges of Columbian and woolly mammoths overlapped, the two sometimes interbred, producing hybrids. These hybrids may have been common, blurring the lines between what we think of as distinct species. There were also steppe mammoths, ancestors of both woolly and Columbian types, that appeared earlier in the Pleistocene. Steppe mammoths were even larger, some of the biggest elephants to ever live, with tusks that grew straighter and heavier than those of the woolly species. Their presence stretched across Europe and Asia long before the woolly mammoth emerged, shaping the landscapes and paving the evolutionary path for the colder adapted forms that came later. In some parts of the world, smaller mammoths evolved as well, isolated on islands where limited resources favoured reduced size. On Wrangel Island, north of Siberia, a population of dwarf mammoths survived until as recently as 4,000 years ago, long after the last glaciers had melted and long after most of their kind had disappeared elsewhere. That means small mammoths were still alive when the pyramids were being built in Egypt. The kin of mammoths also included mastodons, though mastodons weren't true mammoths but rather cousins from a separate branch of the elephant family tree. Mastodons lived mostly in North America, browsing on shrubs and trees rather than grazing on grasses. Their teeth were different, built for chewing leaves and twigs rather than grinding down tough steppe grasses. They carried straighter tusks and stockier builds, and their history stretches back further than the mammoths. Though they shared the same Ice Age landscapes, they filled slightly different ecological roles. more like forest browsers while mammoths dominated the open steppe. What makes mammoths so fascinating is not only how they lived, but how deeply intertwined they became with human survival. For humans in the Ice Age, mammoths were an all-in-one resource. A successful mammoth hunt could feed an entire community for weeks. The bones could be used to build shelters when wood was scarce, the tusks carved into tools, weapons, or even art. Archaeological sites across Europe and Siberia have revealed mammoth bone huts, carefully arranged frames of bones covered in hides, sturdy enough to last through harsh winters. Carvings and figurines made from mammoth ivory are among the oldest examples of human art ever discovered. These weren't just animals to hunt, they were woven into human culture and imagination. The relationship between mammoths and humans was complex. Hunting such a large animal was dangerous, requiring cooperation, strategy, and sometimes clever use of terrain. Evidence suggests humans may have driven mammoths into bogs, pits, or traps to make the kill easier. Spears tipped with stone points were hurled with skill, aiming for vital spots. Even with tools, though, bringing down a mammoth was no small feat. One mistake, and a charging mammoth could crush hunters under its massive weight. And yet, the rewards were too great to ignore. Mammoths also appear in cave paintings, etched on stone walls alongside images of bison, horses, and lions. These drawings, some more than 15,000 years old, capture the shape of mammoths with remarkable detail. The sloping backs, the long tusks, the shaggy outlines. They tell us that mammoths weren't just food, they were part of the symbolic world of humans, creatures of importance and power. Perhaps they represented strength, or perhaps they carried a spiritual meaning for those who depended on them. Whatever the reason, the bond between mammoths and humans was one of necessity, respect, and memory. The extinction of mammoths, like that of so many Ice Age animals, came in waves. Climate change played a role. As the world warmed after the last glacial maximum, the steppe that had supported vast herds began to shrink. Grasslands gave way to forests in some areas and wetlands in others. The mammoth's favoured food became less available, and populations dwindled. At the same time, human hunting pressure increased as our species spread across more territory, armed with better tools and growing populations. The combination of shrinking habitat and persistent hunting was too much for the mammoths to overcome. By about 10,000 years ago, most mammoth populations had vanished from the mainland, with only isolated groups hanging on in remote places. The survival of dwarf mammoths on Wrangel Island until just 4,000 years ago is a reminder of how recently these creatures walked the earth. Imagine that. While humans were inventing writing, building cities and developing trade networks, small mammoths were still grazing on Arctic tundra islands. Their final disappearance wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, as small populations fell victim to inbreeding, dwindling resources, or changes in the fragile ecosystems of their islands. Today, mammoths remain deeply embedded in our fascination with the past. Their frozen remains have been discovered in Siberian permafrost, sometimes so well preserved that their hair, skin, and even stomach contents are still intact. These discoveries bring the Ice Age startlingly close. To see a mammoth's body not as a fossil, but as flesh and bone preserved in ice for tens of thousands of years, is to realise how little time truly separates us from their world. Scientists have studied the DNA of these remains, piecing together the mammoth's genetic code, sparking debates about whether cloning or genetic engineering could one day bring them back in some form. While that remains speculative and controversial, it shows how enduring the mammoth's hold on human imagination is. The kinship between mammoths, mastodons, and modern elephants is also a reminder of continuity. Elephants today carry echoes of their Ice Age relatives. Their social structures, their intelligence, their long memories, and even their tusks all connect them to those ancient herds that once roamed frozen plains. When we watch elephants today, whether in Africa or Asia, we see more than just living animals. We see the survivors of a lineage that has weathered millions of years of change, a lineage that once included the giants of the Ice Age. So when we think about mammoths and their kin, we're not just thinking about extinct beasts. We're thinking about animals that shaped ecosystems, that carved paths through snow with their tusks, that sustained human communities, that inspired art, and that left traces strong enough to survive in ice and memory. The cold may have sculpted them, but their presence shaped the cold world in return, turning barren tundra into landscapes alive with movement, sound, and survival. And in their shadows, other beasts thrived as well, predators and grazers alike, each tied to the great herds that walked beneath the Ice Age sky. If the mammoth was the giant presence that defined the open steppe, then the saber-toothed cat was the shadow that haunted it. Few Ice Age animals are as instantly recognisable as the cat with teeth so long they could hang like daggers from its mouth. Those teeth have fueled endless fascination, often shown in illustrations with snarling mouths wide open, the curved fangs flashing in the light. But the real story of saber-toothed cats, particularly Smilodon, is more complex and more interesting than the image of a perpetual snarl. These were powerful predators, adapted to a world of enormous prey, and their lives were tightly bound to the rise and fall of the herds around them. The name most people know is Smilodon, often simply called the saber-toothed tiger. But despite the nickname, it wasn't closely related to modern tigers. It belonged to a separate branch of the cat family that specialised in a different style of hunting. Smilodon fatalis, the most famous species in North America, lived across much of the continent until about 10,000 years ago. Its larger cousin, Smilodon populator, ranged further south into South America and grew even bigger, possibly the largest saber-toothed cat ever, heavier and taller than any modern lion. These cats were not just lions with long teeth. Their bodies told a story of power and precision, built around a hunting strategy unlike anything we see in big cats today. A modern lion is long-legged and relatively sleek, built to chase and wrestle prey at high speed across open ground. Smilodon was different. Its legs were shorter and more robust, its body stockier, its muscles heavier. Its jaws could open to an astonishing angle, nearly twice that of a modern cat, wide enough to make room for those massive fangs. Its canines could grow up to 20 centimetres long, fragile-looking but deadly sharp. These teeth were not for gripping and holding prey in the way lions use theirs. They were specialised tools designed to deliver a precise killing bite. How exactly Smilodon used its teeth has been debated for decades. The most widely accepted idea is that it targeted the soft, vulnerable parts of its prey, such as the throat or belly. Instead of wrestling prey to the ground and suffocating it over minutes, as lions do, Smilodon likely relied on delivering a deep, quick wound that caused rapid blood loss. This strategy was risky. The teeth, while sharp, were also vulnerable to breaking if they struck bone. To compensate, Smilodon had incredibly strong forelimbs and shoulders, more powerful than those of modern cats. These allowed it to pin struggling prey to the ground, holding them steady long enough for the fatal bite. This method of hunting made sense in the Ice Age. The prey available was enormous: mammoths, mastodons, bison, giant ground sloths, horses, camels, animals so large that a predator needed more than speed to succeed. Ambush and brute force were more effective than long chases. Smilodon's short, muscular build was ideal for sudden bursts of power. Imagine a cat lurking in tall grasses or near a game trail waiting for an opportunity. When a bison strayed too close, the cat would leap, grapple it with its powerful forelimbs and drive its sabres into a vulnerable spot. The fight would have been brutal and fast, and if the strike landed well, the prey's size became irrelevant. Fossil evidence from places like the La Brea tar pits in California has provided remarkable insight into Smilodon's life. Thousands of Smilodon bones have been recovered there, preserved after animals became trapped in sticky asphalt seeps. These fossils show not only the strength of these cats, but also the injuries they endured. Many skeletons have healed fractures, damaged limbs, or signs of arthritis, Yet the animals survived long after such injuries would have made them incapable of hunting. This suggests that Smilodon may have lived in groups, much like lions today, where injured members could still survive with the support of the group. While not everyone agrees on whether Smilodon was social, the evidence at least opens the possibility that these cats hunted together or shared kills, making them even more formidable. Living in groups would also have helped them deal with competition. Smilodon wasn't the only predator of its time. Dire wolves hunted in packs, cave lions roamed across Europe and Asia, and short-faced bears towered over nearly everything. In such a world, a solitary predator risked losing its hard-earned kill to stronger rivals. Cooperation may have tipped the balance, allowing Smilodon to keep its place among the top hunters. For humans living alongside these cats, the danger was very real. While Smilodon may have preferred hunting large herbivores, the presence of humans in its range meant encounters were inevitable. The La Brea tar pits show that predators of all kinds, drawn by the cries of trapped prey, often ended up trapped themselves, suggesting they weren't cautious about potential risks. A human group venturing into Smilodon territory would have needed fire, weapons, and vigilance to avoid becoming easy targets. Even if Smilodon rarely hunted humans directly, the competition for prey would have brought the two species into conflict. What is striking about Smilodon and other saber-toothed cats is how specialized they became. Evolution shaped them for a very particular environment, an environment full of giant prey. That specialization made them extraordinarily successful while the Ice Age herds thrived, but it also made them vulnerable when conditions changed. As the climate warmed and the great herbivore populations dwindled, Smilodon's niche began to collapse. With fewer large prey animals available, its hunting strategy became less effective. Modern big cats with their more flexible approaches could adapt to smaller prey. Smilodon, with its saber teeth and heavy build, could not. Within a few thousand years of the last glacial retreat, the saber-toothed shadows disappeared. But while they are gone, they remain vividly alive in the fossil record. Smilodon's skulls show just how extreme their adaptations were. The canines curving down far past the jawline, the bone structure built to accommodate muscles, strong enough to wrench a massive bite. Full skeletons reveal shoulders and arms that look almost overbuilt, like weightlifters compared to sprinters. These were cats tuned not for elegance but for power, and the remains tell us just how effective that power must have been. There were other saber-toothed predators too, not just Smilodon. The family of saber-toothed cats, the Machairodontinae, included species that spread across Europe, Asia, Africa, and the Americas. Some were smaller, more lightly built, relying on ambush in forests. Others, like Homotherium, sometimes called the scimitar-toothed cat, had slightly shorter, more blade-like teeth and longer legs, suggesting they were more adapted to chasing prey over open ground. Homotherium may have been active during the day, unusual for cats, and may have lived in prides. Fossils of Homotherium have been found as far north as Alaska, showing they too adapted to cold climates. Each of these saber-toothed cats was an experiment in evolution's laboratory, testing ways to bring down prey in a world where size defined survival. Their disappearance doesn't erase their success, it only reminds us how tightly bound life is to the conditions around it. The Ice Age was their time, and in that time, they ruled as effectively as any predator has ever ruled. It's worth remembering that these predators weren't monsters, they were part of a balanced system. Without predators like Smilodon, the vast herds of herbivores might have grown too numerous, stripping landscapes of vegetation and throwing ecosystems out of balance. Predators kept populations in check, culled the weak, and ensured that energy flowed through the system. In that sense, saber-toothed cats helped shape the very world they lived in, leaving marks not only on bones but on landscapes. For us, their legacy is in bones and imaginations. Children see the fangs in museum displays and wonder how such creatures could have existed. Paleontologists study the wear patterns on teeth, the healed injuries, the density of bones, piecing together lives lived tens of thousands of years ago. Artists recreate scenes of smilodon ambushing bison on snowy plains, or two males clashing over a carcass, their fangs gleaming. The shadow of the saber-tooth remains long after the animal itself has gone, and perhaps that's fitting. They were shadows in their time as well, predators that moved quietly until the moment of impact, shaping the lives of every creature that shared their ground. For the mammoths and bison, they were a constant presence. For humans, they were rivals and reminders of the danger that lurked in the grass. For us now, they are windows into a time when nature pushed predators to their limits, when teeth grew longer than seemed possible, when shadows truly had fangs. When people think of sloths today, the image is almost comical. Small, slow-moving animals clinging to trees, creeping along branches at a pace so leisurely that algae grow in their fur. They're gentle, almost cartoonish symbols of patience, but during the Ice Age their relatives were among the largest land mammals to ever walk the Americas. These were not tiny tree dwellers, but colossal ground sloths, some the size of modern elephants, moving across plains and forests with immense strength. To picture them, you need to erase the idea of a sleepy creature dangling from a branch and instead imagine a giant, heavily muscled body, long claws curving like scythes, a barrel chest rising taller than a person, and a lumbering stride that carried them across landscapes filled with mammoths and saber-toothed cats. The group of animals we call ground sloths belonged to a wider order called Xenathra, which also included armadillos and anteaters. Sloths themselves split into two main lifestyles: the tree-living sloths we still see in Central and South America, and the much larger ground-dwelling ones that appeared millions of years ago. These ground sloths diversified into dozens of species, filling roles that range from medium-sized browsers to true giants. The most famous of these giants was Megatherium, which lived in South America and could weigh more than 4 tons, rivaling elephants in mass. Standing on its hind legs, supported by its massive tail like a tripod, it could reach heights of 6 meters, towering above even the tallest humans. Imagine an animal with the bulk of an elephant, the claws of a bear, and the slow, deliberate movements of something that didn't need to fear most predators. The claws were perhaps their most striking feature. Some ground sloths had claws more than 30 centimeters long, sharp and curved. They weren't for tearing meat. These animals were herbivores, but for pulling down branches, stripping leaves, and possibly defending themselves. To a predator, those claws would have been a serious deterrent. A swing from a Megatherium's arm could break bones. Smaller species of ground sloths like Mylodon and Celidotherium also carried formidable claws, though their bodies were lighter. Even these smaller sloths, however, were far larger than any tree sloth alive today. Ground sloths spread across both North and South America, adapting to a range of environments. Some lived in forests, feeding on leaves and fruits, while others grazed in open areas, eating shrubs and grasses. Their teeth, unlike those of many herbivores, didn't have enamel. Instead, they were made of dentin, a softer material, but they kept growing throughout life, wearing down from constant chewing of fibrous plants. This meant they could handle tough, abrasive vegetation that might wear out the teeth of other animals. Their slow metabolism, similar to modern sloths, allowed them to survive on relatively low-quality food. Despite their slow image, ground sloths were not defenseless, nor were they easy prey. Fossil evidence suggests they were capable of bursts of strength and had thick hides that would have made them difficult to bring down. Predators like saber-toothed cats or short-faced bears may have targeted young or weak individuals, but a full-grown Megatherium would have been a dangerous opponent. Humans, however, developed strategies to hunt even these giants. Archaeological sites in South America show evidence of human interaction with ground sloths. In some caves in Patagonia, skin and dung remains of Mylodon have been found, preserved for thousands of years. Some of the skin show cut marks that may indicate butchering. For people of that era, a single ground sloth kill would have provided meat, hide, and bone resources enough to sustain groups for long periods. The survival strategies of ground sloths extended beyond size and claws. Some species, like Milodon, are thought to have lived in caves, using them for shelter. Remains found in Chilean caves were so well preserved that when first discovered in the 19th century, scientists thought they might belong to animals that had died only recently. The skin was tough and leathery, with ossicles, small bony plates embedded in the skin, that may have acted as a kind of armour. These plates provided extra protection against predators, much like the armour of their armadillo relatives. The role of ground sloths in their ecosystems was significant. Their size and diet meant they were ecosystem engineers, shaping vegetation through their browsing. By pulling down branches, clearing shrubs, and dispersing seeds, they altered the landscape in ways that affected other species. Modern elephants play a similar role in Africa today, creating openings in forests and maintaining grasslands by feeding on trees. Ground sloths likely had comparable effects in the Americas, ensuring a mix of habitats that supported a diversity of animals. One of the most intriguing aspects of ground sloths is how long some of them survived. While many large Ice Age mammals went extinct around 10,000 years ago, coinciding with the warming climate and the spread of humans, evidence suggests some ground sloths persisted on Caribbean islands until much later. On Cuba and Hispaniola, smaller species of sloth survived until about 4,000 to 5,000 years ago. That means they were still alive when humans were building ancient civilizations in other parts of the world. The idea that people living in early agricultural societies might have overlapped with ground sloths is a reminder of how recent these creatures really were in the timeline of life. Their eventual extinction seems to have been caused by a combination of factors. Climate change played a role, as warming conditions reduced the habitats that favoured giant grazers. Human hunting pressure added further strain, especially since these animals reproduce slowly. A species with a slow metabolism and long gestation periods cannot quickly rebound from population losses. The evidence from caves and kill sites suggests that humans used ground sloths as resources, and over time, that pressure may have tipped them into extinction. What makes ground sloths especially fascinating is that they challenge our expectations. We expect sloths to be small and harmless, yet their ancient relatives were among the dominant herbivores of their time. We think of claws as weapons for predators, yet ground sloths use theirs primarily for feeding and defense. We think of caves as homes for carnivores, yet these herbivores may have used them too. They were animals that didn't fit neatly into categories, blending traits that seemed contradictory into a lifestyle that worked for millions of years. The remains they left behind continue to surprise scientists. In some cases, dung deposits have preserved microscopic details of their diets, allowing researchers to reconstruct the plants they ate and the environments they lived in. In others, mummified remains with hair and skin intact have given us direct glimpses of their appearance. DNA analysis has revealed their relationships to modern sloths and armadillos, confirming that these strange giants were part of a lineage that, though mostly gone, still lingers in the treetops of Central and South America. For modern people, imagining ground sloths can feel almost surreal. Picture standing in a clearing and watching a creature the size of a small building rear up on its hind legs, balance with its massive tail, and pull down entire branches with a single sweep of its claws. Picture hearing the heavy footsteps in the undergrowth, the breaking of branches, the deep breathing of an animal that weighed several tons. These were not rare monsters, but common parts of the landscape, as normal to Ice Age eyes as cattle are to us today. And yet, they carried an appearance and presence that feels almost fantastical. Ground sloths remind us that the Ice Age was not just about predators and cold, but about diversity and abundance. For every saber-toothed cat, there were prey species that had evolved their own defences and adaptations. For every mammoth herd, there were other giants sharing the land, each with its own strategies for survival. The ground sloths show how varied those strategies could be, and how success could take forms very different from speed or ferocity. Their extinction also carries lessons Large, slow-breeding animals are especially vulnerable to rapid changes, whether caused by climate or human activity. Once populations decline below a certain threshold, recovery becomes almost impossible. The story of the ground sloths is a reminder that even the largest and strongest animals can disappear quickly when pressures become too great. It's a story that echoes in modern times as elephants, rhinos, and other large mammals face similar challenges from habitat loss and hunting. Yet despite their loss, ground sloths continue to live in our imagination. Museums display their skeletons, claws curving like hooks, rib cages wide enough to stand inside. Reconstructions bring them back to life in dioramas, showing them alongside early humans and other Ice Age animals. Each fossil bone, each preserved skin fragment, is a piece of a puzzle that tells us how life once looked, and how strange and varied survival can be. And as we move forward through the Ice Age world, the presence of the ground sloths helps us appreciate the balance that existed. They were herbivores, not hunters, yet they were every bit as impressive as the predators that stalked the same landscapes. They show us that being slow does not mean being weak, and that sometimes patience and size are enough to hold a place among the giants. When people first see a reconstruction of a mastodon, the reaction is usually a mix of recognition and confusion. It looks like a mammoth, and by extension like an elephant, yet something feels different. The build is stockier, the head a little flatter, the tusks straighter. It carries the same imposing presence as its relatives, but it is not the same animal. The mastodon, an Ice Age giant in its own right, roamed North America for millions of years, living side by side with mammoths, yet occupying a very different role in the ecosystems of the time. To really appreciate the Ice Age as a whole, it helps to spend some time with the mastodon, because these animals were not merely smaller mammoths. They were unique, and their story adds another layer to the frozen world we're exploring. The mastodons belong to the genus Mammoth, with the American mastodon, Mammoth americanum, being the best known. Their lineage actually split from that of mammoths and modern elephants tens of millions of years earlier. This makes them more like distant cousins than close siblings. While mammoths and elephants are classified together in the genus Mammuthus and Loxodonta, or Elephas, mastodons stand apart. Their evolutionary path gave them distinct adaptations that suited their preferred habitats. Where mammoths grazed the open steppe, mastodons thrived in forests and woodlands. Feeding on twigs, leaves, bark, and other coarse plant material, one of the easiest ways to see this difference is in their teeth. Mammoths had flat, ridged molars designed to grind down grasses. Mastodons had cone-shaped cusps on their molars, better suited for crunching branches and leaves. The very name mastodon comes from Greek, meaning breast tooth, a reference to the nipple-like shape of these cusps. These teeth made mastodons browsers, not grazers, and their entire lifestyle reflected that diet. Instead of marching across windswept plains in vast herds, they were more likely to move through wooded areas, breaking branches with their tusks, pushing over saplings and stripping bark with their trunks. Their appearance carried its own unique traits. Mastodons were slightly shorter than woolly mammoths, averaging around 3 meters at the shoulder, though still massive by any standard. Their bodies were more compact, with straighter tusks that could reach up to 5 meters long. These tusks sometimes curved slightly upward, but lacked the dramatic spiral of a mammoth's. They were used not only for feeding, but also for fighting and display. Male mastodons, especially during mating season, may have clashed tusks in battles much like modern elephants do today. Their skulls were lower and flatter than mammoths, giving them a different profile, and their hair was likely less dense than that of woolly mammoths, since they lived in slightly more temperate environments. Mastodons lived across a huge range in North America, from Alaska down to central Mexico, and they were astonishingly successful. Fossils have been found in swamps, forests and river valleys, often in areas rich with plant growth. They thrived in environments where mammoths were less common, showing how different habitats could support different giants at the same time. While mammoths roamed the cold steppes, mastodons made the forest their domain. Together they represented two strategies for survival in the Ice Age, one for open plains, one for wooded shelter. For early humans, mastodons were as important as mammoths. Archaeological evidence suggests they were hunted, butchered and used in much the same way. In some places, mastodon bones have been found with cut marks from stone tools, and tusks or bones were sometimes carved into weapons or ornaments. In 1977, near Sequim, Washington, archaeologists uncovered a mastodon rib with a sharpened bone point embedded in it, evidence of humans hunting these animals over 13,000 years ago. For hunters armed with nothing more than spears and cooperation, taking down a mastodon must have been a dangerous, exhausting task. But like the mammoth, the reward was immense: food for an entire group, materials for tools and shelter, hides for clothing. The cultural significance of mastodons may have extended beyond survival. In many indigenous traditions across North America, stories tell of great beasts that once roamed the land, often described in terms that echo mastodons and mammoths. While it's difficult to draw direct connections, it's not hard to imagine that the memory of these animals lived on in oral traditions long after the last of them disappeared. For people who lived alongside such giants, their presence must have been unforgettable. The extinction of mastodons followed a familiar pattern. As the last ice age ended around 11,000 years ago, the climate shifted. Forests changed, wetlands dried, and habitats that had once supported vast populations of browsers began to shrink. At the same time, human populations were spreading across the Americas, bringing advanced hunting strategies with them. The combination of environmental change and human hunting pressure created stresses that mastodons couldn't withstand. By about 10,000 years ago, mastodons were gone from most of their range, surviving only in memory and in the fossil record. Fossils of mastodons are remarkably common across North America. Entire skeletons have been uncovered in bogs and riverbeds, sometimes so well preserved that even tusks and molars are intact. These finds give us a detailed picture of their anatomy and lifestyles. In some cases, DNA has been recovered from frozen remains, offering clues about their genetic history. Studies suggest that mastodon populations were already fragmented and declining before the final extinction, weakened by the stresses of changing environments. The differences between mastodons and mammoths are a reminder of how varied the Ice Age world was. To us, both appear as massive, tusked relatives of elephants, but in their time they occupied distinct roles. Mammoths grazed, mastodons browsed, mammoths wandered open plains, mastodons thrived in forests. Mammoths had thick coats for extreme cold. Mastodons were more adapted to mixed climates. Together they reveal that survival during the Ice Age wasn't about a single formula, but about finding the right niche and filling it well. It's interesting too to think about how mastodons would have appeared to human eyes compared to mammoths. From a distance, perhaps they looked similar, great tusked giants moving slowly through the landscape. But up close, the distinctions would have been clear. The straighter tusks, the flatter head, the preference for wooded areas. For a hunter, recognizing the difference mattered. One meant searching grasslands, the other meant venturing into forests. Each required different skills and strategies. For people who lived close to the land, these details weren't scientific trivia. They were matters of survival. The tusks of mastodons have left their own record too. Like tree rings, tusks preserve growth patterns that reflect an animal's life history. Scientists have studied the chemistry of mastodon tusks to track their movements and diets across seasons. One famous mastodon, discovered in Indiana and nicknamed Fred, showed through tusk analysis that it ranged widely during its lifetime, returning to certain areas seasonally. Such studies bring these animals closer to us, transforming bones into stories of migration, feeding, and survival. What's remarkable is how mastodons endured for so long before their final disappearance. They first appeared around 25 million years ago, long before the Ice Age. They survived multiple waves of climate change, spreading across continents and diversifying into different species. The American mastodon was the last of this long lineage, persisting until humans arrived in the Americas. In the vast sweep of their history, their extinction is recent, and their bones are still close to the surface of the earth, reminders of a world that ended not so long ago. To stand before a mastodon skeleton in a museum today is to be struck by both familiarity and difference. The skeleton is elephant-like, yes, but heavier in its proportions, with tusks stretching forward in long arcs, and teeth shaped so differently they tell a story at a glance. That blend of the familiar and the alien is part of what makes mastodons so compelling. They remind us that the Ice Age was full of creatures that we can recognise but never truly know in the flesh. They lived in forests of spruce and fir, along riverbanks thick with vegetation, in wetlands where their massive feet pressed into the mud. They drank from the same waters that would one day carry canoes and ships. Their shadows fell on landscapes that, though colder and wilder, are still the same continents we inhabit today. Thinking of mastodons this way, not just as extinct relatives of elephants, but as living animals that shaped forests and human lives, helps bring the Ice Age closer. They were not outliers. They were part of a broader web of life that included mammoths, ground sloths, saber-toothed cats, dire wolves, and humans. Each had its place, and each was shaped by the same advancing and retreating ice. Mastodons remind us that even within one family of animals like elephants, evolution can produce astonishingly different answers to the same question. How do you survive in a changing world? When most people think of wolves, they imagine the grey wolf, the species still roaming across parts of North America, Europe and Asia today. Sleek, clever, social, and haunting in its howl. But during the Ice Age there was another wolf, one larger and stronger, with a presence that has echoed in myths and stories long after it vanished. This was the dire wolf, Canis dirus, a predator that ruled the Americas for hundreds of thousands of years. Unlike the wolves we know, the dire wolf was built heavier, its jaw more powerful, its skeleton sturdier, its teeth designed for tackling prey that would intimidate even the fiercest carnivores alive today. To picture a dire wolf, don't think of the lean shape of a modern wolf sprinting across snowfields. Think of an animal closer in size to a large mastiff, shoulders thick, head broad, teeth ready to crunch through bone, and always moving in packs where numbers and cooperation made them deadly. Dire wolves appeared around 250,000 years ago and spread widely across both North and South America. Fossils have been found from Canada to Bolivia, showing they adapted to a wide range of habitats. They were especially abundant in areas rich with large herbivores, and like many Ice Age predators, their fate was tied to those herds. Their diet was broad but favoured big game: horses, bison, camels, even young mammoths and mastodons when the chance arose. The size of these animals meant that hunting alone was nearly impossible. It required teamwork, and dire wolves were specialists in cooperation. The very structure of their bodies tells us about their hunting style. Compared to modern grey wolves, dire wolves were stockier and heavier, averaging around 70 kilograms, with some larger individuals reaching close to 80. Their skulls were bigger, their jaws deeper, and their teeth slightly larger. This suggests they were capable of delivering stronger bites, able to shear through thick hides and crush bones to get at the nutritious marrow inside. They were less built for long-distance chases than grey wolves, favouring ambush or short pursuits where their strength and numbers could overwhelm prey. Pack hunting in dire wolves was almost certainly similar to that of modern wolves, though perhaps even more essential given the size of their targets. Imagine a group of dire wolves working together against a bison, some snapping at the legs to slow it, others leaping at its flanks, while the strongest went for the head or throat. A single wolf could not have managed such a kill, but a coordinated pack could. The risk was great. A bison's horns or a kick from a horse could crush a wolf's ribs, yet the payoff was survival for the entire pack. That social cooperation is what made dire wolves so successful during the Ice Age. Much of what we know about dire wolves comes from one remarkable site, the La Brea tar pits in California. There, tens of thousands of dire wolf bones have been uncovered, preserved in sticky asphalt that trapped animals for millennia. More than 4,000 individuals are represented in the fossil record there, far more than any other species. This wealth of remains provides unparalleled insight into their lives. The sheer number of dire wolf fossils suggests they were extremely common, and their social structure likely drew them into danger. Prey animals would become stuck in the tar, their cries attracting predators. Wolves, lions, and saber-toothed cats came to feed, only to become trapped themselves. One by one, the hunters joined the hunted, leaving behind a fossil graveyard that captures their abundance and their fate. The bones reveal details beyond numbers. Many show healed injuries, broken bones, dislocated joints, even spinal damage that wolves lived with for years, injuries that severe would have made survival difficult for a solitary predator. The fact that these wolves endured suggests they lived in packs that supported them, allowing injured members to keep feeding even when they could no longer hunt effectively. This is one of the strongest clues that dire wolves had strong social bonds, perhaps even stronger than those of grey wolves today. The dire wolf story has gained new depth in recent years thanks to genetic research. For decades, scientists assumed dire wolves were simply larger relatives of grey wolves, part of the same lineage, but DNA extracted from fossils has revealed something surprising. Dire wolves were not closely related to grey wolves at all. In fact, they were a separate branch of canids that diverged more than 5 million years ago. This means that while they looked similar to modern wolves, their similarity was a case of convergent evolution. Two lineages shaped by similar pressures into similar forms. In reality, dire wolves were more distant cousins than siblings, and their lineage was entirely separate, with no surviving descendants today. That isolation may help explain why they disappeared while grey wolves survived. The extinction of dire wolves, like that of so many Ice Age animals, came around 10,000 years ago. As the climate warmed, many of the large herbivores they depended on began to decline. Horses, camels, giant bison, and other prey animals vanished from the Americas, leaving fewer options for specialized predators. Humans, spreading across the continents, added pressure by hunting the same prey and altering ecosystems. Grey wolves, with their more flexible diets and wider range of prey sizes, were able to adapt. Dire wolves, heavier, more specialized and dependent on big game, could not make the same shift. Within a few thousand years they were gone, leaving behind only their fossils. But while their bones are silent, the idea of the dire wolf has lived on in imagination. The name itself carries weight, conjuring something larger, fiercer, more dangerous than a normal wolf. Stories of giant wolves appear in cultures across the Americas, often as creatures of power or danger. In modern times, popular fiction has borrowed the dire wolf's image, turning it into a symbol of strength, loyalty, and menace. While these portrayals are often exaggerated, the truth of the dire wolf was already impressive enough. For humans living in North America during the Ice Age, dire wolves were both rivals and dangers. Packs of wolves competing for the same bison herds humans hunted would have been constant competition. The howls of dire wolves across the plains at night must have been both familiar and unnerving. To hear dozens of voices rising in unison, knowing they came from animals larger and stronger than any wolves alive today, must have been a reminder that survival was never guaranteed. Fire, weapons, and group cooperation were the tools that allowed humans to hold their ground against predators that otherwise would have dominated. The image of dire wolves moving in packs across snowy plains, their breath visible in the cold air, their eyes fixed on distant herds, brings us closer to the world of the Ice Age. They were not loners but social hunters, tied together by bonds of survival, loyalty, and necessity. They remind us that even in a world filled with enormous herbivores and terrifying predators, Cooperation was one of the most powerful tools evolution ever produced. And though they are gone, they continue to connect us to that frozen era. Each fossil jaw, each tooth marked by wear, each bone healed from injury, speaks of an animal that lived and fought and endured in the same landscapes where people once built fires and shared meat. The dire wolf story isn't just about power or size. It's about how life adapts, thrives, and sometimes disappears when the world changes too quickly. It's about how even the most formidable hunters depend on balance, and how when that balance shifts, shadows fade from the earth. If the dire wolf was the pack hunter that ruled with cooperation, then the short-faced bear was the solitary giant that ruled with size. When people imagine bears, they usually think of brown bears fishing in rivers, or polar bears stalking seals across the ice. Those are large animals, no doubt, but during the Ice Age in North and South America, there lived a bear that dwarfed them all. It was called Arctodus simus, the giant short-faced bear, and it may have been the largest carnivorous mammal ever to walk on land. To stand in its presence would have been to see a creature whose sheer size altered the landscape of fear around it. The short-faced bear lived from about 1 million years ago until the end of the Pleistocene, roughly 11,000 years ago. Fossils have been found from Alaska down into Mexico, showing that it roamed across a wide range of habitats. It stood over 1.6 meters tall at the shoulder, when on all fours, and when it reared up on its hind legs it could tower more than 3.5 meters into the air, taller than any man, and taller even than many mammoths' backs. Males may have weighed as much as 900 kilograms, perhaps even more. Compared to the largest brown bears alive today, it was still significantly larger, and its proportions set it apart. The most striking feature, the one that gave it its name, was the shape of its face. Unlike modern bears with long broad snouts, the short-faced bear had a shorter, deeper skull. This gave its face a blunt appearance, but also created space for huge jaw muscles. Its legs were long and slender compared to other bears, built more for speed than for lumbering. Some scientists believe it may have been able to run surprisingly fast for its size, perhaps up to 50 or 60 kilometers an hour over short distances. This combination of size, speed, and strength made it a predator of enormous capability, or at the very least a competitor no other carnivore wanted to challenge. There has been debate among scientists about what role the short-faced bear played in its ecosystem. Some argued that its size and speed made it a hypercarnivore, an active predator that chased down large prey such as horses, camels, or even young mammoths. Its long legs and lightly built frame support this idea, suggesting an animal that could cover ground quickly and overpower prey with its sheer bulk. Others suggest it may have been more of a scavenger, using its intimidating size to drive other predators away from their kills. Its teeth were not as specialized for bone crunching as those of hyenas, but they were still capable of processing meat efficiently. Perhaps the truth lies somewhere in between, a flexible strategy where the short-faced bear both hunted when it could and scavenged when the opportunity arose. Imagine the scene on an Ice Age plain. A pack of dire wolves or a saber-toothed cat pride brings down a bison after a hard fight. They begin feeding, but the sound of heavy footsteps in the distance signals a change. Out of the snow or tall grass comes the looming shape of a bear, its head high, its stride long and confident. The predators at the kill hesitate, knowing that a fight would mean death or injury. The bear approaches, growls deep and resonant, and the wolves scatter, the cats retreat. The bear takes the kill for itself, a strategy called kleptoparasitism, stealing food from others, made possible only by overwhelming size. For smaller predators, giving up the meal was safer than risking everything. The fossil record supports the idea that short-faced bears were widespread and successful for a long time. Their remains are found in caves, tar pits, and river valleys across the Americas. Some skeletons are so complete that we can see details of their joints and muscles, confirming their adaptations for long strides. Studies of isotopes in their bones suggest a diet heavy in meat, reinforcing the picture of a predator or scavenger that relied on large animals. These chemical signatures indicate that short-faced bears ate more animal protein than modern omnivorous bears, which split their diets between plants and meat. Their interactions with humans must have been dramatic. Imagine a small band of Ice Age people, armed with spears tipped with stone points, encountering a short-faced bear. Fire and numbers might give them some defense, but the sheer size of the bear would make any confrontation dangerous. Humans may have avoided them when possible, just as we avoid confrontations with grizzlies today. Yet at the same time, the two species must have competed for the same prey. Every bison or horse taken by humans was one less available for bears, and every kill made by humans could have drawn the attention of these giants. For early people, the arrival of a short-faced bear at a hunting site could mean the difference between feast and famine, safety and disaster. In South America, another short-faced bear, Arctotheria mangostidens, grew even larger than its northern cousin. Some individuals may have reached weights of 1,500 kilograms, making them the heaviest bears ever known. These colossal bears lived in environments rich with prey such as giant sloths, horses, and native ungulates. Just as in the north, their massive size made them dominant in their ecosystems. No predator could easily challenge them, and their presence must have shaped the behaviour of every other carnivore around them. Despite their dominance, short-faced bears faced the same challenges as many other Ice Age giants. As the climate warmed and the great herds began to vanish, their food sources became scarcer. Their specialisation on large prey and meat-heavy diets left them vulnerable when ecosystems shifted. Humans added further pressure, both as competitors and as hunters. Even if people did not often target short-faced bears directly, the depletion of prey and the disturbance of habitats weakened the balance these bears depended on. By about 11,000 years ago, both Arctodus in the north and the giant Arctotherium in the south had disappeared, leaving behind no descendants. Their extinction opened the way for the bears we know today. Brown bears, black bears, and spectacled bears filled the ecological roles left empty, though none ever reached the same size. The largest brown bears can still grow to impressive masses, but compared to the short-faced bears, they remain smaller, more omnivorous, and less specialised. The Ice Age giants showed what bears could become under conditions of abundant prey and competition. But when those conditions vanished, so too did the giants. Standing in front of a reconstructed skeleton of a short-faced bear today is enough to make the imagination race. The skeleton towers high above, its ribcage wide, its skull broad and blunt, its long limbs stretching forward as if ready to stride off the museum platform. It is easy to imagine how such an animal would have moved across plains or through forests, how its presence alone would have silenced the landscape, how wolves and cats would have stepped aside at its approach. It embodies the scale of the Ice Age, when animals grew beyond what we're used to seeing, shaped by an environment that demanded strength and rewarded size. What makes the short-faced bear especially fascinating is not just its size, but its mystery. We can piece together its bones, we can analyse its teeth, we can test its isotopes, but questions remain. How much of its life was spent hunting versus scavenging? Did it truly run down prey with its long legs, or was it more of a dominant thief at kills? Did humans ever bring one down successfully, or did they simply avoid them whenever possible? These unanswered questions give the bear a shadowy quality, as if even with all our science, it refuses to reveal itself completely. And yet, it was real. It lived in the same world as mammoths, mastodons, ground sloths, and dire wolves. It walked across the same lands humans were learning to inhabit. Its tracks pressed into the same mud, its breath clouded the same cold air, its growls echoed under the same skies. To think of the short-faced bear is to think of a predator so large that even imagination struggles to grasp it. yet one that shaped the lives of every animal that shared its ground. When people think of lions today, the picture that comes to mind is usually of the African savanna. Golden coats gleaming in the sun, pride stretched out in the shade of acacia trees, roars carrying over the grasslands. But during the Ice Age, lions had a much wider kingdom. They were not confined to Africa, but roamed across Europe, Asia and North America, larger and more powerful than the lions of today. These were the cave lions, Panthera spelaea, and they were among the largest cats to ever live. Alongside them were Ice Age leopards, less known but no less fascinating, adapted to survive in some of the harshest conditions on Earth. Together, these cats were key players in the predator world of the Pleistocene, shaping the lives of prey and people alike. The cave lion takes its name from the places where its images were discovered. Deep within Ice Age caves, early humans painted them with remarkable detail. These cave paintings, such as those found in Chauvet Cave in France, show lions hunting together, manes absent or only faintly suggested, bodies stretched in motion, eyes fixed on prey. The art makes it clear that humans not only knew these animals well, but also considered them important enough to depict on stone walls, where they may have gathered for ritual or storytelling. To paint an animal is to remember it, and the cave lion was remembered more than almost any other. Scientifically, the cave lion was a subspecies or close relative of the modern lion, though debate continues over whether it should be considered distinct. What is clear is that it was larger, with males standing taller and weighing more than modern lions. Some estimates suggest they were up to 10% bigger, putting the largest cave lions at over 250 kilograms. They lacked the thick, shaggy coats of the woolly animals around them, but their fur was well adapted to the colder climates of Ice Age Europe and Asia. Unlike African lions, males may not have had large manes, which could have been a practical adaptation, since a heavy mane would have offered little advantage in cold climates and might have even been a hindrance. The cave lions hunted much like modern lions, relying on strength, stealth and cooperation. Fossil evidence combined with human art suggests they lived and hunted in groups. Their prey was abundant: bison, reindeer, horses, and sometimes even young mammoths or rhinos. Imagine a pride of these lions stalking across the snow, bodies low, breath visible in the cold air, moving together with silent coordination. When the time came, they would burst forward, bringing down prey with claws and teeth, just as modern lions do, but with the size advantage that made them capable of handling even larger game. These cats were not confined to Europe. In North America, a closely related form, often called the American lion, Panthera atrox, roamed widely. This was perhaps the largest cat species ever known, with males reaching over 300 kilograms and standing taller than any modern big cat. To put it in perspective, they were nearly a metre longer than African lions. Their range stretched from Alaska to Peru, showing just how adaptable and successful they were. The American lion, like its Eurasian cousin, would have been a dominant predator, preying on horses, camels and bison across the plains. The size and strength of these lions meant they had few natural enemies, but they were not invincible. Dire wolves hunted in packs, saber-toothed cats competed for similar prey, and short-faced bears could drive them from kills. The Ice Age predator guild was crowded, and every hunt carried risks, not only from the prey itself, but from rivals who might appear after the kill. Competition likely shaped the behaviour of cave lions, pushing them toward group living and cooperation, strategies that allowed them to defend their food and their young. For humans, lions were both danger and inspiration. Cave paintings suggest a deep awareness of their power. The lions were not painted as background figures but as central subjects, often in groups, sometimes in scenes that seem to show hunting behaviour. To depict an animal in art is to acknowledge its importance, and the cave lion's recurring presence shows it was more than just another predator. It may have been admired, feared, or even revered. For hunter-gatherers who lived in the same landscapes, lions were competition for prey and a potential threat to safety, but they were also creatures of undeniable presence, worthy of being remembered on stone. Alongside the lions, Ice Age leopards also carved out their niche. Leopards are versatile cats, and during the Pleistocene they were widespread across Africa, Asia and parts of Europe. Fossils suggest they were slightly larger than modern leopards, with robust builds adapted to colder conditions. Unlike lions, leopards are solitary hunters, relying on stealth and ambush rather than group cooperation. They would have stalked prey in forests or rocky areas, using cover to get close before springing forward in a sudden attack. The prey of Ice Age leopards varied depending on where they lived. In some areas they hunted deer, ibex or smaller ungulates. In others, they may have scavenged from larger predators when opportunities arose. Their adaptability was their strength. Unlike the highly specialised saber-toothed cats, leopards could shift their diets and behaviours depending on what was available. That adaptability is likely one reason leopards survived the end of the Ice Age while many larger cats vanished. They could eat smaller animals, hide from larger competitors, and avoid the risks of group hunting. Though they were smaller than cave lions, Ice Age leopards were not insignificant. Their spotted coats offered camouflage in snowy forests or rocky cliffs, making them dangerous to prey and difficult for humans to detect. For people venturing into leopard country, the risk was real. A leopard could strike suddenly, silently, leaving little chance to react. While humans likely respected lions for their power, they may have feared leopards for their stealth. The interaction between these cats and humans may have gone beyond simple avoidance. Some evidence suggests humans wore leopard skins, a practice that continues in some cultures today. The use of leopard pelts could have been practical, for warmth, but it may also have carried symbolic meaning, a way of taking on the qualities of the predator. For people living in harsh Ice Age conditions, the idea of borrowing the stealth or strength of a leopard may have held spiritual significance. Cave lions, leopards and their relatives highlight the diversity of big cats in the Ice Age. This was not a world where one predator dominated, but one where multiple strategies coexisted. Lions relied on group cooperation, leopards on solitary stealth, saber-toothed cats on precision killing with specialised teeth. Together they created a complex web of predator-prey relationships that shaped the ecosystems of the time. Prey animals had to navigate landscapes filled with dangers from all sides, where every shadow might conceal a cat waiting to strike. The extinction of cave lions and American lions came around the same time as many other Ice Age giants, roughly 10,000 years ago. As climates warmed and prey animals declined, their populations dwindled. Human hunting may have played a role as well, both through direct competition and through reducing the numbers of the animals lions depended on. Leopards, smaller and more adaptable, survived, continuing their lineage into the present. Today, their range has shrunk, but they remain one of the most widespread and versatile big cats on Earth, living proof of the adaptability that saved their ancestors. Standing before a cave lion skeleton today, it is clear why these animals captured the imagination of early humans. The size, the power, the elegant but deadly build, they embodied the wildness of the Ice Age. To see one moving across the snow, muscles rolling beneath its coat, eyes fixed on a herd of reindeer or bison, would have been to see raw survival at work. For people sharing that world, it must have been both terrifying and awe-inspiring, the kind of experience that demands to be remembered in stories and art. When people think of armoured animals, the first image that usually comes to mind is the armadillo, a small, harmless creature that scuttles along the ground and curls into a ball when threatened. But in the Ice Age, armadillos had a cousin that was nothing short of a walking fortress. These were the glyptodons, herbivorous giants covered in domes of bone, creatures that looked like tanks with tails. They were among the most distinctive animals of the Pleistocene, and their strange bodies tell us a great deal about how life adapts to survive in a world full of predators and uncertainty. A glyptodon was massive compared to its modern relatives. Some species grew to over 3 meters in length and weighed more than a ton. Imagine something the size of a small car moving slowly across the tundra, grazing on plants, its body covered in a shell made of thousands of bony plates called osteoderms. This armour was fused together into a solid dome, so rigid that it turned the animal into a living shield. Unlike modern armadillos, which can roll into balls, glyptodons could not curl up. They didn't need to. Their entire back, head, and even the base of their tail were protected by armour. For a predator, bringing down such a creature was a challenge, if not a near impossibility. Their tails were just as remarkable as their shells. Many glyptodons carried heavy club-like tails reinforced with bone. Some species had tails tipped with spikes or knobs, turning them into weapons as much as defences. A swing from a glyptodon's tail could break bones, perhaps even fend off attacks from saber-toothed cats or short-faced bears. Fossil evidence shows wear patterns and injuries on some tails, suggesting they were used in combat, not only against predators, but possibly against other glyptodons in battles over territory or mates. The tail was more than just an appendage. It was a mace carried at all times, a reminder that even herbivores in the Ice Age had to be ready to fight. Glyptodons belong to the same order as armadillos, sloths and anteaters, a group called Xenathra. Their lineage stretches back millions of years in South America, where they evolved into many forms. Some were smaller, some enormous, but all carried the distinctive armoured shells that defined the group. When the continents connected through the Isthmus of Panama a few million years ago, glyptodons moved northward into Central and North America. Fossils have been found as far north as Texas and the southern United States, showing that these creatures spread widely wherever conditions suited them. Their diets were simple but effective. Glyptodons were grazers, feeding on grasses and other low-lying plants. Their teeth were unusual, lacking enamel and growing continuously, much like those of ground sloths. This allowed them to handle tough, fibrous vegetation without wearing their teeth down to uselessness. Their slow metabolism meant they could survive on low-quality food, which was a major advantage in environments where the growing season was short and vegetation sparse. They didn't need to chase prey or compete directly with predators for meat. Instead, they relied on bulk feeding, armour and patience. Despite their formidable defences, glyptodons were not invincible. Humans posed a unique threat. Archaeological evidence shows that people hunted glyptodons, likely targeting them with spears or finding ways to exploit weak points in their armour. Once a glyptodon was killed, it offered tremendous rewards. Its meat would have fed many people for days or weeks, and its shell could be repurposed as shelter. There are accounts suggesting that some early groups may have used the shells as makeshift huts, turning nature's armour into protection against the elements. Whether this was common or rare, the idea illustrates how closely human survival was tied to these Ice Age giants. Glyptodons were part of a wider community of armoured herbivores in South America, including their relatives, the smaller Pampatheras. These were also armoured grazers, though not as heavily fortified, and they occupied niches similar to modern antelopes or deer, filling landscapes with variety. Together they formed a group of animals that showed how armour could be a successful survival strategy in a dangerous world. Where mammoths relied on size, sloths on claws, and bison on herds, glyptodons turned their very bodies into fortresses. The presence of glyptodons in the Ice Age ecosystems added balance. Predators may have thought twice before attacking them, but their grazing still shaped plant communities. By eating large amounts of grasses, they helped maintain open habitats. Their slow movements and armoured bodies must have been familiar sights across plains and river valleys, a contrast to the speed of horses or the agility of deer. To stand and watch one grazing would have been to see an animal almost otherworldly in its design, yet completely at home in its environment. Like many other Ice Age animals, glyptodons disappeared around 10,000 years ago. Climate change altered habitats as glaciers retreated, shrinking the open grasslands they depended on. Human hunting added further pressure, and as with mammoths and mastodons, slow reproduction rates left them vulnerable. Once populations began to decline, recovery became impossible. Within a few thousand years of the end of the last glaciation, the armoured tanks of the tundra were gone. Their extinction was not the end of their story. Fossils and preserved shells continue to be found, some so well preserved that the texture of the armour is still clear. Museums reconstruct them in life-size displays, showing visitors the strange and formidable creatures that once walked the earth. Their resemblance to armadillos helps us see the continuity of life, the way lineages change but persist, reshaping themselves over time. Modern armadillos are small, but they carry the echoes of their massive cousins, reminders that the past was stranger and grander than we often imagine. For humans today, glyptodons inspire the same sense of wonder that they must have inspired in those who saw them alive. To imagine an animal with the size of a car, the shape of a dome, the tail of a club, and the quiet persistence of a grazer is to imagine survival at its most inventive. They show that defense can be as powerful as offense, and that sometimes the best strategy is simply to endure, armoured against whatever the world brings. And in the world of the Ice Age, where predators lurked in every shadow, and survival was never guaranteed, that strategy worked for millions of years. The glyptodons held their ground, armoured and unyielding, until the balance shifted and they could hold it no longer. When people think of beavers, the picture that comes to mind is a busy little animal gnawing at trees, dragging branches into rivers, and building dams that change the shape of entire landscapes. They're small, industrious, and strangely endearing. But during the Ice Age, their relatives were far from small. The giant beaver, Castoroides, was an animal that took everything familiar about the beaver and magnified it into something extraordinary. At more than 2 meters long and weighing close to 100 kilograms, it was the largest beaver to ever live, a creature that blurred the line between the ordinary and the fantastic. Giant beavers lived across North America, from Canada to Florida, thriving in wetlands, rivers and lakes during the Pleistocene. Fossil evidence shows that they were widespread and successful, adapting well to the watery environments that stretched across glacial and interglacial periods. Their size alone made them stand out, but what makes them fascinating is how their lives compared to those of the beavers we know today. Despite the similarities in appearance, giant beavers were not simply scaled-up versions of modern ones. They had differences that set them apart, shaping a lifestyle that was unique to their time. One of the biggest differences was in their teeth. Modern beavers have sharp, chisel-like incisors with orange enamel, perfect for cutting down trees. Their dams and lodges are built from felled branches, and their survival depends on their ability to manipulate wood. The giant beaver's incisors, however, were different. They were longer, up to 15 centimeters, but they were more rounded and lacked the sharp cutting edge. Instead of being built like chisels, they were shaped more like curving rods. This suggests that giant beavers may not have been tree cutters at all. Instead, they probably fed on aquatic plants, gnawing through roots, tubers and stems rather than felling trees. If that was the case, then giant beavers may not have built dams or lodges like their modern relatives. They didn't need to. At their size, and with their preference for marshy environments, they may have lived more like grazing herbivores of the wetlands, foraging in shallow waters and along the edges of lakes. Imagine seeing a pair of these animals swimming through a reedy marsh, their huge heads breaking the surface, their teeth glinting as they pulled up water plants. They would have been impressive, strange, and yet oddly peaceful presences in the Ice Age landscape. Their bodies were well suited to this aquatic life. Fossil evidence indicates they had large, flat tails similar to modern beavers, useful for swimming and balance. Their limbs were strong and likely webbed, allowing them to move efficiently in water. Despite their bulk, they were built for life in ponds and rivers, not for speed on land. On shore, they may have appeared awkward, dragging their heavy bodies across mud and grass, but in water, they were at home, using their size and power to move steadily through currents and reeds. The ecosystems they lived in were rich and diverse. Ice Age wetlands supported waterfowl, amphibians, fish, and a range of herbivores that came to drink at the water's edge. For predators, these wetlands were hunting grounds. Dire wolves, saber-toothed cats, and short-faced bears all knew that prey would come to the water. For giant beavers, this meant constant vigilance. Their size gave them some protection, but they were not invincible. Young beavers especially would have been vulnerable to predators, and even adults could fall victim to large carnivores if caught on land. Their safest refuge was always the water, where they could dive and escape more easily than on open ground. Humans also encountered giant beavers. Archaeological evidence hints that people may have hunted them, though the evidence is sparse compared to that for mammoths or mastodons. The size of a giant beaver would have made it an attractive source of meat, and its pelt could have been valuable for warmth. For groups living near lakes and rivers, these animals would have been familiar sights, and it is not hard to imagine hunters crafting strategies to catch them, perhaps with traps or by driving them into shallow areas. The extinction of giant beavers came around the same time as many other Ice Age animals, roughly 10,000 years ago. As the climate warmed, wetlands shifted and shrank, reducing the habitats that supported them. Human hunting may have added to the pressure. Their specialization on aquatic plants may have left them less adaptable than other animals, and once their environments changed, survival became difficult. Slowly, the giant beavers disappeared, leaving only their smaller relatives to carry on the family line. To imagine a giant beaver alive today is to realize how unusual the Ice Age truly was. Picture standing by a lake and seeing a beaver the size of a black bear swimming past, its head massive, its teeth long and rounded, its body sending ripples across the water. Picture it climbing slowly onto the bank, shaking itself and lumbering toward a patch of aquatic plants to feed. It's an image that feels almost impossible, and yet for tens of thousands of years, it was ordinary life in North America. Their story also shows how evolution can take familiar forms and expand them into something extraordinary. Beavers had already proven successful as semi-aquatic herbivores, shaping landscapes with their engineering. The giant beaver took the aquatic lifestyle in a different direction, becoming a grazer of wetlands, armoured not with shells or tusks but with sheer size. Both strategies worked for a time, but only one lineage survived. The modern beaver, smaller, versatile and industrious, endured while the giant version faded into the past. The fossils left behind tell us more than bones. Some sites preserve giant beaver teeth in remarkable condition, their curved surfaces worn from years of use. These teeth, larger than a human hand, show us the scale of the animal's life, the plants it chewed, the waters it swam. In some places, partial skeletons have been found in ancient lake beds, revealing how widespread and numerous they once were. Each discovery adds to the picture of a creature that was once as ordinary as deer or elk are to us today. For humans sharing their world, the presence of giant beavers may have been both useful and symbolic. Some researchers suggest that indigenous traditions about giant water creatures could have roots in memories of these animals, passed down through generations long after the last of them had vanished. It's not hard to imagine how a creature of such size, half familiar and half strange, would have left impressions deep enough to survive in stories. The giant beaver stands as another reminder that the Ice Age wasn't just about predators and towering herbivores. It was also about diversity, about life finding niches in every corner of the environment. While mammoths thundered across plains and lions prowled snowy forests, the giant beavers swam quietly in rivers, shaping wetlands, feeding steadily and enduring for as long as their world allowed. And when we look at them today through the lens of fossils and imagination, we see not only what was lost, but also what remains. The small beavers that still build dams and lodges carry the echoes of their giant relatives. They remind us that the extraordinary is often rooted in the ordinary, and that even something as unassuming as a beaver can, under the right conditions, become one of the giants of the earth. When people hear the word camel, the mind immediately conjures desert images, long treks across endless sand, dunes rolling like waves, and the distinctive humps swaying as the animal moves. Camels have become almost inseparable from the idea of dry, scorching landscapes, but their history is far stranger than that. The camel family actually originated in North America, and for most of its evolutionary history, it was not confined to deserts at all. In fact, during the Ice Age, camels lived in environments very different from the Arabian and Central Asian deserts we know them in today. Some even adapted to the freezing climates of the Pleistocene, roaming cold grasslands and steppe-like regions where ice and snow were constant presences. These were the camels of the cold, survivors of a lineage that began in the Americas and stretched across the world. The camel family, scientifically called Camelidae, includes not only the camels we recognise today, but also llamas, alpacas, vicuñas, and guanacos of South America. All of these animals trace their roots back to North America millions of years ago. Fossils reveal a diverse array of camel species that lived on this continent, ranging from small deer-like forms to massive giants that rivaled giraffes in height. Over time, some migrated into South America, giving rise to the camelids that still graze the Andes today, while others crossed into Eurasia and Africa, where true camels eventually adapted to desert life. The camels that remained in North America evolved their own unique forms, including those that survived into the Ice Age. One of the most striking of these Ice Age camels was Camelops hesternus, sometimes called the yesterday's camel. This species lived across North America until about 10,000 years ago, overlapping with mammoths, mastodons, and giant ground sloths. Standing over 2 meters tall at the shoulder, Camelops was similar in size to modern camels, but its exact appearance is still debated. Did it have humps like today's dromedaries and Bactrians? Fossil skeletons can't answer that question, since humps are made of fat and soft tissue that don't fossilize. Some scientists suspect that it did, since humps are such an efficient adaptation for storing energy, but others argue it may have had a leaner build, better suited to colder conditions. What is clear is that these camels thrived in environments that were far from sandy deserts. During the Ice Age, much of North America was covered by cold steppe and open grasslands, dotted with patches of forest and wetlands. These landscapes were shaped by advancing and retreating glaciers, which created a mosaic of habitats. Camelops adapted well to this variety, browsing on shrubs and grazing on grasses, using its long legs to travel across wide distances in search of food. Its height gave it an advantage in spotting predators and reaching vegetation, much like giraffes today. Fossilized bones show wear on the teeth consistent with mixed feeding. Not strictly grazing, not strictly browsing, but flexible, which would have been essential in a changing climate. Cold tolerance is what makes these camels so fascinating. While modern camels are symbols of hot environments, their thick coats and ability to conserve water also make them surprisingly suited to cold. Today's Bactrian camels, native to the steppes of Central Asia, endure temperatures that plunge well below freezing, protected by heavy winter coats that they shed in spring. The Ice Age camels likely carried similar adaptations. Their coats would have been thick and insulating, their bodies designed to handle the bitter winds of glacial winters as easily as their modern relatives endure desert heat. This dual ability to handle extremes is what made camels such successful animals across their evolutionary history. The presence of camels in Ice Age North America might sound strange, since we think of them now as exotic imports. But fossils show that camels lived on this continent for over 40 million years before finally disappearing here at the end of the Pleistocene. In many ways, camels are as North American as bison or horses, both of which also originated here before spreading elsewhere. When humans arrived, they encountered camels not in deserts, but in cold plains, part of the same megafaunal community as mammoths and saber-toothed cats. For those people, camels would have been familiar figures, just as deer or elk are to us today. Archaeological sites provide evidence that humans hunted camels. Stone tools have been found alongside camel bones, some marked with cut marks that suggest butchering. For Ice Age hunters, camels would have offered meat, hides, and bones for tools, much like other large herbivores. Hunting them, however, would not have been simple. Camels were tall, strong, and fast, capable of running at speeds that could outpace many predators. Their long legs carried them across open ground with ease, and their height made them difficult to approach unseen. Hunters would have needed strategy, cooperation, and persistence to bring one down, much as they did with bison or horses. The extinction of camels in North America followed the same pattern as many other Ice Age giants. As the climate warmed and habitat shifted, resources changed. At the same time, human hunting added pressure. Camels, with their relatively slow reproductive rates, could not withstand sustained losses. By about 10,000 years ago, they had vanished from their home continent, yet their relatives survived elsewhere. In South America, llamas and alpacas endured, adapted to high-altitude cold rather than steppe cold. In Asia and Africa, camels thrived in deserts, shaped by different pressures, but still carrying the resilience that had defined their lineage for millions of years. The story of camels in the Ice Age highlights how much of what we think of as normal for an animal is shaped by the present, not the past. Today, camels are desert survivors, but their deeper history shows them as versatile animals capable of living in icy steppe, rocky mountains and temperate plains. Their biology is about enduring extremes, whether those extremes are blistering heat or freezing cold. That ability to adapt is what allowed them to spread so widely and survive for so long. Fossil remains of camels in places like Yukon and Alaska add another fascinating twist. There, scientists have discovered evidence of an even more cold-adapted camel that lived in the Arctic around 3.5 million years ago, long before the height of the Ice Age. Its remains were found on Ellesmere Island, far above the Arctic Circle. This camel was larger than modern ones and carried features that suggest adaptations to life in extreme cold and low light. Its discovery reshaped how scientists think about camel evolution, proving that these animals had been adapting to cold for far longer than anyone realised. The desert camel, it turns out, may be the latest chapter in a story that began in frozen landscapes. For humans who lived alongside Ice Age camels, these animals must have seemed both familiar and strange. They were herd animals, moving in groups, wary of predators, and tied to water sources much like other prey. Yet their long legs, humped backs, and tall silhouettes would have set them apart. To see camels grazing among bison or walking near mammoths must have been a reminder that the Ice Age world was filled with combinations that don't exist today. The extinction of camels in North America erased part of that diversity, leaving behind only bones and the scattered memory of what once was. Standing before a fossil skeleton of a camelops today, the resemblance to modern camels is obvious, but so is the difference. The bones are taller, heavier, adapted to a harsher environment. To imagine it alive is to imagine not a desert traveller, but a cold steppe grazer, fur thick against the wind, legs striding across frozen ground. It shows us how easily our assumptions can mislead us, and how every animal story is deeper than the role we assign it in the present. The camels of the cold remind us that survival is about versatility, about carrying traits that can endure change. Their disappearance from North America was recent, and their legacy still lives in every camel and llama alive today. They were part of the Ice Age tapestry, sharing space with mammoths, sloths, wolves, and humans, adding their tall shapes to the horizon of frozen plains. Among the great beasts of the Ice Age, few inspire as much awe as the Irish elk. The name is misleading on both counts. It wasn't confined to Ireland, and it wasn't truly an elk, at least not in the way we use the word today. Its proper scientific name is Megaloxeros giganteus, and it was a species of giant deer, one of the largest that ever lived. What makes it unforgettable is not only its immense size, but the enormous antlers that crowned its head. Those antlers could stretch over 3.5 meters from tip to tip, wider than the height of a man and heavier than most people could lift. To see one of these animals walking across the steppe, its vast antlers rising like branches of a tree, would have been to see a creature that seemed both real and mythic at once. The Irish elk ranged widely across Eurasia during the Pleistocene, from Ireland, where many well-preserved remains have been found, to Siberia and China. It lived in open woodlands and grasslands, feeding on grasses, herbs and shrubs, much like modern deer. Males were immense, standing nearly 2 meters tall at the shoulder and weighing up to 700 kilograms. Females were smaller, but still large compared to most modern deer. Their antlers, however, were the defining feature. Only the males carried them, as with modern deer, and they shed and regrew them annually. The energy required for this was enormous, making antler growth one of the most impressive feats of biological engineering in the animal kingdom. Why grow such massive antlers? That question has fascinated scientists for centuries. Early theories suggested the antlers might have been impractical, a burden that contributed to the species' extinction. But closer studies show they were functional. The most widely accepted explanation is sexual selection. Males with larger antlers were more successful in attracting mates and in intimidating or fighting rivals. During the mating season, males may have clashed antlers in displays of dominance, just as deer do today, though the size of Irish elk antlers meant these battles would have been on a colossal scale. Even if not used often in combat, the antlers served as signals of health and strength, visible across long distances on the open steppe. The antlers were not just for show, though. They may have had practical uses as well, such as sweeping aside branches or defending against predators. But their main function seems to have been reproductive success, and that purpose shaped the evolution of the species. The cost was high. Growing antlers that size each year required immense amounts of calcium and nutrients. Irish elk needed rich diets during the summer to fuel this growth, grazing on the lush grasses of interglacial meadows. During harsher glacial periods, when resources were scarcer, the stress of antler growth may have become harder to bear. The landscapes where Irish elk lived were varied. In some places they roamed open grasslands where their size and antlers made them stand out against the horizon. In others they lived in woodland edges, feeding on shrubs and herbs. Their bodies were built for both grazing and browsing, with teeth capable of handling a mix of foods. Like many Ice Age herbivores, they were adaptable, but their sheer size meant they required vast amounts of food. This made them dependent on productive ecosystems, and when climates shifted, their populations could suffer. For predators, Irish elk were both a prize and a challenge. Adult males with their antlers and size would have been formidable opponents. Saber-toothed cats, cave lions and dire wolves may have targeted the young, the weak, or the old rather than risk injury against a strong stag. But during the rutting season, when males were distracted by fighting and displaying, they may have been more vulnerable. The annual cycle of growth, competition, and exhaustion created windows of opportunity for predators, shaping the rhythm of the ecosystem. Humans, too, encountered Irish elk, and their remains are found at sites associated with early people. Cave paintings and carvings suggest they were hunted, though perhaps not as heavily as some other animals. The antlers themselves would have been striking objects, perhaps used as tools, weapons, or symbolic items. To a human community, the sight of an Irish elk would have been unforgettable, a towering animal crowned with a rack of bone wider than a doorway. Whether admired, feared, or both, they must have left strong impressions on the people who shared their world. The extinction of the Irish elk came in waves. The species survived through multiple glacial and interglacial cycles, adapting to changes in climate and vegetation. But as the last ice age ended, and forests spread across Europe and Asia, the open habitats they favoured shrank. Dense forests were less suited to animals with enormous antlers, which may have been cumbersome among trees. At the same time, human hunting pressure increased. Populations dwindled, and by around 7,500 years ago, the last Irish elk were gone. That date is surprisingly recent. They survived well past the extinction of mammoths in many regions, living alongside humans who were already practicing agriculture and building permanent settlements. The antlers left behind in bogs and lakes have fascinated people for centuries. In Ireland, where many of the best preserved specimens were found in peat bogs, they were displayed in castles and museums as symbols of strength and mystery. Their sheer size made them objects of wonder, inspiring myths and stories about giant stags of the past. Even today, standing before a mounted set of antlers in a museum is enough to stop people in their tracks. They seem almost impossible, as if no animal could have carried them. Yet they were real, carried every year by living creatures that grazed across Ice Age meadows. The Irish elk story raises interesting questions about the balance between natural selection and sexual selection. Natural selection favours traits that help survival, while sexual selection favours traits that help reproduction, even if they come at a cost. The enormous antlers of the Irish elk were costly, but they brought reproductive success. As long as the environment provided enough resources, the trade-off worked. When conditions changed, the cost may have outweighed the benefit. This delicate balance shows how evolution is not about perfection, but about compromise, shaped by pressures that can shift suddenly. What's remarkable is that despite their extinction, the Irish elk remain vivid in the fossil record and in human imagination. They're often depicted alongside mammoths and saber-toothed cats in illustrations of the Ice Age, standing as symbols of grandeur and strangeness. Their presence reminds us that the world was once filled with forms of life that seem exaggerated compared to what we see now, and yet these exaggerations were normal then, successful strategies in their time. To imagine an Irish elk in life is to picture a vast open plain, grasses swaying, and a herd of deer moving slowly across it. Among them, a male stands taller, his antlers spreading wider than the reach of most trees, his breath rising in the cold morning air. The sound of antlers clashing echoes across the steppe as males fight for dominance, a spectacle of size and strength that has no equal among living deer. For early humans watching, it must have been both a source of food and a source of awe, a reminder of the scale and beauty of the natural world. The Irish elk may be gone, but its antlers remain, silent monuments to a time when animals grew larger, stranger, and bolder in form than almost anything alive today. They are reminders of how life experiments, how it balances costs and benefits, and how survival depends not only on strength but on the environment that supports it. In a landscape shaped by glaciers and winds, where the cold cut through bone and snow lay heavy across the ground, survival was never a given. Many of the Ice Age giants that lived in such places carried size or weapons that made them impressive. Antlers spreading wider than trees, tusks curling like ivory crescents, claws long as scythes. But some of the most successful animals of that time did not rely on spectacle. Instead, they endured because they were built for resilience. Few animals embody that quiet strength better than the muskox, a creature that looks unassuming compared to mammoths or saber-toothed cats, but has survived challenges that brought down even the most spectacular giants. The muskox, Vibos moschatus, is a relic of the Ice Age that still lives today, roaming the Arctic tundra of Greenland, Canada, and parts of Alaska. Its survival tells us something about what it takes to endure when conditions grow harsh. These animals are not giants in the same sense as mammoths or Irish elk, but they are formidable in their own way. Stocky, covered in thick coats of wool and guard hairs, and travelling in herds that protect against predators, musk oxen carry the strategy of persistence. They are, in many ways, echoes of the Ice Age still alive in the present. During the Pleistocene, musk oxen were more widespread than they are today. Their fossils are found across Europe, Asia and North America, showing that they once ranged from the British Isles to Siberia, from Alaska to Mexico's higher plateaus. They thrived in steppe tundra environments, the vast cold grasslands that stretched across the northern continents. These regions were open, windy and bitterly cold for much of the year, yet they supported rich communities of grazing animals. The muskox was one of the specialists in this ecosystem, feeding primarily on grasses, sedges and mosses, able to extract nutrition from food that would seem almost barren to many other herbivores. The physical adaptations of musk oxen are remarkable. Their long shaggy coats consist of 2 layers, an outer layer of coarse guard hairs that shed snow and rain, and an inner layer of kivyut, one of the warmest natural fibres known, finer than cashmere and capable of trapping heat even in brutal cold. Beneath their fur, their compact bodies conserve warmth, minimising surface area compared to volume. Their legs are short and strong, built for stability on icy ground. Their horns, sweeping outward and then curving upward, provide defence against predators and tools for dominance fights among males. Every part of their anatomy is designed not for speed or spectacle, but for survival in environments that test endurance above all else. Herd life is central to the muskox strategy. When threatened, muskoxen do not scatter and flee like deer or antelope. Instead, they form defensive circles or lines, with adults facing outward and calves sheltered in the middle. Their horns and massive heads form a living wall of defence, ready to repel wolves or other predators. This behaviour is a reminder that survival often depends on cooperation as much as individual strength. For Ice Age predators, a herd of muskoxen was a dangerous target. Attacking the wall of horns could lead to injury or death, and many wolves or lions likely avoided them unless calves strayed too far or weakness was evident. The diet of muskoxen reflects their resilience as well. They feed on plants buried under snow, using their hooves to dig through the frozen crust. Even in the dead of winter, when little else moves on the tundra, muskoxen continue to graze, sustaining themselves on the sparse vegetation that remains. Their digestive systems are efficient, extracting every possible nutrient from fibrous food. This ability to survive on low-quality forage gave them an advantage in environments where other herbivores might starve. Humans of the Ice Age certainly encountered muskoxen and likely depended on them in some regions. Their meat provided food, their hides offered warmth, and their wool could have been gathered and used long before the development of weaving as we know it. Hunting muskoxen, however, was not without risk. Approaching a herd meant facing a wall of horns and determined animals that would not run. Success required strategy, persistence, and group effort. Yet the rewards were immense, and for people living in cold northern landscapes, musk oxen may have been as important as reindeer or caribou. The resilience of musk oxen stands out when compared to the many other Ice Age giants that vanished. Mammoths, mastodons, giant sloths, cave lions, all disappeared as climates warmed and humans spread. But musk oxen, like reindeer, adapted and endured. Their ability to survive on sparse forage, their defensive herds and their coats suited for extreme cold gave them an edge in the Arctic, even as forests replaced much of the steppe elsewhere. They contracted in range, retreating northward as their habitats shrank, but they did not vanish. Today, musk oxen are often called living fossils, though that phrase can be misleading. They are not unchanged relics, but survivors, species that have persisted through adaptation and luck. Their populations dwindled in some regions, and in others they disappeared entirely, only to be reintroduced by conservation efforts. Yet their continued presence connects us directly to the Ice Age in a way that few animals do. To watch a herd of muskoxen on the tundra today is to glimpse the same strategies that carried them through thousands of years of glacial cycles, predators, and human hunters. Their story reminds us that resilience can take many forms. For some Ice Age animals it was size, for others speed. For the muskox it was endurance, cooperation, and the ability to make do with little. They may not dominate the imagination the way mammoths or saber-toothed cats do, but their survival speaks just as loudly about what it means to endure in a world shaped by ice. To picture them in their Pleistocene range is to imagine open grassland stretching to the horizon, winds sweeping snow across the ground, and a herd of muskox moving slowly, their coats rippling in the cold air. Calves trot close to their mothers, bulls lower their horns at the sight of movement in the distance, and together the herd faces whatever comes. They were not the largest, nor the most dramatic, but they were among the most enduring, carrying their Ice Age legacy into the present. For all the giants that walked the earth during the Ice Age, the mammoths with their curling tusks, the saber-toothed cats with their long fangs, the armoured glyptodons rolling like tanks across the plains, the most consequential arrival was not another beast. It was people. Compared to the colossal animals that already dominated the landscape, humans were unimpressive in size. They had no thick fur to guard against cold, no massive tusks to fend off predators, no claws, no bone armour. Yet when humans entered the Ice Age world, they did not just survive, they changed it. The first humans to reach the colder parts of Europe and Asia had already learned skills from warmer homelands. Fire, tools, and cooperation were their defences. In Africa, where humans had evolved, survival had long depended on coordination and intelligence. When people began moving into harsher regions, these same qualities proved even more important. Ice Age environments were unforgiving, but people adapted with creativity. They learned to make clothes from hides, to use fire for warmth, and to craft shelters from bone, wood, and stone. They were not physically stronger than the animals they encountered, but they were problem solvers, and that made all the difference. By the time humans reached Europe, around 45,000 years ago, the landscape was already crowded with predators and prey. Mammoths and woolly rhinoceroses grazed in herds, while lions, wolves, and saber-toothed cats hunted them. Into this world walked people armed with little more than stone-tipped spears, persistence, and the ability to work together. At first glance, their odds may not have looked good, but people had something no other animal matched: the ability to share knowledge, plan hunts, and create strategies that change the balance of survival. One of the clearest signs of humans stepping onto the Ice Age stage comes from art. Deep in caves in France, Spain, and beyond, people painted animals with astonishing skill. Mammoths, bison, horses, and lions were depicted in flickering torchlight on stone walls, images so vivid that they still speak across tens of thousands of years. These paintings show more than creativity. They show observation. Humans watched these animals closely enough to capture their shapes and movements, then recorded them for reasons we can only guess. Perhaps the paintings were spiritual, perhaps educational, perhaps both. Whatever their purpose, they reveal a relationship between people and animals that was different from simple predator and prey. Humans were reflecting, imagining, and giving meaning to the world around them. But humans were not just observers. They were hunters. Archaeological sites reveal butchered bones of mammoths, bison, horses, and even reindeer, marked with cuts from stone tools. Sometimes entire mammoth skeletons show evidence of coordinated hunts, where people drove animals into traps or ambushes. Such hunts must have required planning, cooperation, and patience. No single human could bring down a mammoth, but a group working together with weapons, fire, and strategy could succeed. Once a kill was made, the rewards were immense. Meat for food, hides for clothing and shelter, bones and tusks for tools. Each animal represented survival for the group, and humans learned to make the most of every part. Life alongside the Ice Age giants was not only about hunting, it was also about avoiding becoming prey. A human caught alone by a cave lion or a dire wolf had little chance of survival. Fire and weapons gave some defence, but numbers and caution were always essential. Camps were built with fire at the centre, a deterrent to predators, and people learned to guard their communities. The threat of being hunted shaped behaviour just as much as the need to hunt. Every journey across a frozen plain carried risk. Every encounter with an animal could mean life or death. Yet humans endured, their adaptability allowing them to face dangers that would have overwhelmed less resourceful species. As humans spread across continents, they brought new dynamics into ecosystems. In North America, when people first arrived around 15,000 years ago, they encountered a world filled with camels, horses, mammoths, and giant sloths. Within just a few thousand years, many of these animals were gone. Debate continues about how much human hunting contributed to these extinctions compared to climate change, but the overlap is striking. Wherever humans arrived, the largest animals tended to disappear soon after. Even if people did not wipe them out directly, the added pressure of hunting combined with shrinking habitats was enough to tip the balance. What set humans apart in this period was not just survival, but culture. Tools became more refined, shelters more complex, and clothing more tailored. In colder regions, people stitched together hides with bone needles, creating garments that were warmer and more fitted than simple draped skins. They built huts from mammoth bones, covering them with hides to create shelters that could withstand wind and snow. These adaptations show how people were not just reacting to their environments, but reshaping them, bending the rules of survival to their own advantage. Social bonds played a central role as well. Cooperation meant more than just hunting together. It meant sharing food, caring for the injured, teaching skills to younger generations. Fossil evidence of humans from the Ice Age shows individuals who lived long despite injuries or illnesses that would have made survival alone impossible. This indicates communities cared for their members, ensuring that even those who could not contribute fully were supported. Such care is part of what allowed humans to thrive, building networks of survival that no other species could match. Spirituality also left its mark. Burial sites from this time show deliberate placement of bodies, sometimes with tools, ornaments, or animal bones. These burials suggest people had beliefs about life and death, about connections that went beyond immediate survival. To bury someone with care is to express meaning, and this meaning would have bound communities together in ways deeper than food and shelter. Shared stories, rituals, and beliefs gave humans resilience not only in body, but in spirit. Everywhere humans went, they adapted to local conditions. In northern Europe and Siberia, they hunted reindeer and mammoths, using their resources to endure bitter winters. In the Americas, they pursued bison and horses across open plains. In coastal areas, they fished and gathered shellfish. Flexibility was the human advantage. While many Ice Age animals were specialized, giant sloths for slow browsing, saber-toothed cats for ambush hunting, humans could shift strategies as environments changed. That versatility is what allowed them to spread farther and faster than any other species, and as humans entered the stage, they changed it permanently. The disappearance of a large animal's reshaped ecosystems. Grasslands that had once been grazed by mammoths became forests. Predator-prey dynamics shifted when lions or dire wolves lost their food sources. Humans did not just fit into the Ice Age world, they altered it. This was the beginning of a pattern that has continued ever since. People as agents of transformation, reshaping landscapes, redistributing species, and redefining survival. To imagine humans during this time is to picture small groups moving across vast frozen landscapes, their fires glowing in the night, their voices carrying over the wind, children huddled in hides, elders passing down stories, hunters preparing weapons, gatherers collecting roots or berries where they could be found. They were vulnerable, yet determined. They were small compared to mammoths, yet capable of changing the fate of entire species. Their arrival was subtle at first, but the consequences echoed across continents. Humans entering the stage of the Ice Age is not just a story about survival. It is a story about transformation, of landscapes, of ecosystems, of relationships between species. In their intelligence, their cooperation, and their creativity, people carried tools more powerful than tusks or claws, and those tools reshaped the world in ways no other animal had before. If people entering the Ice Age world looked fragile compared to the mammoths and lions around them, the secret to their survival lay in things invisible at first glance. Strength alone didn't matter much when your body was smaller and weaker than almost everything you met on the steppe. What mattered were the ways humans reshaped their surroundings, the things they made with their hands, and the way they worked together. With stone, wood, bone, and fire, they changed the odds. With cooperation, they made the impossible possible. Tools, fire, and community weren't extras in their lives. They were the foundations of survival. Long before the Ice Age, humans and their ancestors had already been shaping stone into useful edges. By the time people were sharing the landscape with mammoths and cave lions, stone tool making had become highly sophisticated. Blades were sharper, thinner, and more versatile than anything made by earlier hominins. Spears tipped with carefully worked points could penetrate hide and muscle, turning a human into a threat even to animals much larger than themselves. These points were often made from flint or chert, stones that fractured cleanly and allowed precision shaping. The process of making them wasn't simple. It took knowledge, patience, and practice, passed down through generations. Each flake struck from the stone core wasn't random, but part of a mental plan, a sequence remembered and taught by those who had mastered it. Bone and ivory also became essential materials. Mammoth tusks and reindeer antlers were shaped into spear tips, needles, and ornaments. The flexibility of bone tools gave people new options. Harpoons for fishing, barbed points for hunting, awls for sewing hides. The variety of tools grew, and with it the ability to exploit every resource available. No part of an animal was wasted. Hides became clothing and shelter, bones became tools, sinew became thread, fat became fuel for lamps. This level of resourcefulness meant that humans could live in places where other animals, less adaptable, might starve or freeze. Fire was perhaps the most transformative tool of all, though it wasn't an invention of the Ice Age. Early humans had controlled fire for hundreds of thousands of years, but during the glacial periods it became more vital than ever. Fire brought warmth in bitter cold, light in long winter nights, protection against predators, and the means to cook food. Cooking broke down fibres and released nutrients, allowing people to get more energy from their meals. It also expanded the range of edible foods, from roots to meat, that would otherwise be tough or unsafe to eat raw. Fire was carried in embers from camp to camp, tended with care because losing it could mean disaster. Around the fire, people gathered. It was the centre of camp life, a place for warmth, storytelling, and planning. The glow of firelight may have been where myths were born, where memories of hunts turned into stories passed down across generations. It was also a defence. Predators, wary of flames, often kept their distance. For a group of people on a dark steppe night, surrounded by howls and the distant shapes of shadows, the fire wasn't just practical, it was reassurance. It allowed sleep, safety, and the confidence to stay in one place long enough to build more complex communities. But tools and fire alone weren't enough. What truly set humans apart was cooperation. Many Ice Age animals lived in groups, from bison herds to wolf packs. But humans took cooperation to another level. Hunting a mammoth, for example, wasn't something a lone person could attempt. It required coordination, signalling, and strategy. Groups might drive an animal into a pit or toward a cliff, or surround it with spears. Each person had a role, and success depended on trust and communication. When the kill was made, the rewards were shared. One mammoth could feed dozens of people, making cooperation not only efficient but necessary. Cooperation extended beyond hunting. Shelter building required many hands to move bones and hides into place. Clothing needed sewing, tanning, and preparation of materials. Children had to be cared for, the elderly supported. No one person could do everything alone. Communities functioned because knowledge and labour were shared. Archaeological finds reveal individuals who lived long despite severe injuries or illness, evidence that they were cared for by their groups. Such acts of care meant survival rates were higher and communities were stronger for it. The ability to teach and learn was central to this cooperation. Language, or at least highly complex communication, allowed humans to pass on skills in ways no other species could match. A child could watch tool making, hear instructions, and practice until they mastered it. Knowledge wasn't lost when one person died. It accumulated across generations. Over time, techniques became more refined, strategies more effective, cultures more complex. What began as simple survival strategies grew into traditions, stories, and rituals tied to the environment and the animals that lived within it. The impact of these skills shows clearly in the archaeological record. Sites from the Ice Age reveal not only tools but also art and symbolic objects. Carvings of animals, ornaments made from shells and bones, decorated clothing. These show that cooperation extended into culture itself. Communities bonded not only over food and shelter, but over shared meaning. This too was a survival strategy. Belief systems and rituals gave people reasons to endure hardship, ways to explain the world, and connections to each other that were deeper than necessity alone. Predators and prey alike had strategies for survival. Mammoths used tusks and size, wolves used packs, lions used stealth. Humans had tools, fire, and cooperation, and in the end those proved more adaptable. While other Ice Age animals were tied to specific diets or habitats, people could adjust. When prey was scarce, they fished, gathered, or trapped smaller animals. When wood was limited, they burned bone for fuel. When the cold grew worse, they built shelters with mammoth bones or dug into permafrost for protection. Each obstacle was met not with a single trait, but with an array of shared solutions. The spread of humans across the globe during the Ice Age shows how powerful this combination was. From Africa to Eurasia, from Siberia to the Americas, people found ways to adapt to wildly different environments. Tools were adjusted for local materials, fire was carried into new climates, cooperation was scaled to larger groups, with networks of trade and exchange beginning to form. What started as small bands of hunters and gatherers grew into cultures capable of altering entire ecosystems. And yet these achievements were always fragile. Fire could be lost, tools could break, cooperation could falter. To keep these foundations strong, people had to remain vigilant, resourceful, and united. That balance is what allowed them to survive alongside animals that were larger, stronger, and seemingly better equipped for life in the Ice Age. In the end, though, it was not claws or tusks that reshaped the world, but the spark of fire, the edge of stone, and the ties between people. For hundreds of thousands of years, the Ice Age world had been dominated by giants. Mammoths with their sweeping tusks, mastodons rumbling through forests, ground sloths towering on their hind legs, lions larger than any alive today, and armoured creatures like glyptodons grazing across open plains. They were the defining presence of their landscapes, shaping ecosystems through their size, their movements, and their constant need for food. To live in that world was to live in the shadow of immense animals, each adapted in its own way to survive the cold and the predators that came with it. But even giants are vulnerable when the ground beneath them begins to shift. The end of the giants didn't come all at once, but in a series of declines that spread across continents as the last Ice Age drew to a close. Around 20,000 years ago, the Earth began to warm. Glaciers retreated, sea levels rose, and habitats changed. What had once been endless steppe tundra, rich with grasses and herbs that supported herds of grazers, gave way to forests in many regions. The open plains that fed mammoths and bison shrank, replaced by woodlands less suited to such massive animals. For herbivores built to consume tons of grass every week, this shift was catastrophic. The carrying capacity of the land no longer matched their needs, and slowly their numbers dwindled. Predators followed the same pattern. Cave lions, saber-toothed cats, and dire wolves relied on those herds. When the herds began to thin, so did the predators. It wasn't that these carnivores were less skilled hunters, it was that their prey base had collapsed. Every ecosystem is a web, and when one strand weakens, others follow. The decline of herbivores created a ripple effect that reached every predator, scavenger, and even plant community in the Ice Age world. Overlaying these changes was the arrival and spread of humans. For tens of thousands of years, people had hunted and gathered in scattered groups. But as they spread across new territories, their numbers grew, and so did their impact. Human hunting was not always constant or overwhelming, but it added pressure at exactly the time when large animals were most vulnerable. Archaeological evidence shows mammoths hunted on plains, mastodons butchered in forests, and bison driven into traps. Spears and fire gave humans an edge, and cooperation allowed them to bring down animals no single hunter could face. For many species, it wasn't just hunting, but competition. Humans and predators often targeted the same prey. When people took more and more of the bison, reindeer, or horses, less was left for lions or dire wolves. Humans were not just another predator. They were a predator that could outplan and outlast, armed with weapons, fire, and persistence. To a pack of wolves, a herd of bison might mean survival, but to a band of humans, that same herd was equally crucial, and humans had the advantage of strategy. The overlap in needs set the stage for conflict, even if it wasn't direct confrontation. The extinction pattern varied across regions. In North America, mammoths, mastodons, giant ground sloths, camels, and horses all vanished within a few thousand years of human arrival, around 13,000 to 10,000 years ago. In South America, glyptodons and giant armadillo relatives disappeared in the same window. In Eurasia, mammoths lingered longer, with small populations surviving on islands off Siberia until just 4,000 years ago. Each region had its own timeline, but the common theme was clear. As climates warmed and humans spread, the giants faded. The reasons for these extinctions have long been debated. Climate change is the obvious factor. The end of the Ice Age brought rising temperatures, shifting rainfall, and new vegetation patterns. Large animals adapted to open steppe found themselves in shrinking habitats. Human hunting is another factor, and evidence shows it played a significant role. The overkill hypothesis argues that human hunting alone drove many species to extinction. Others believe it was a combination, climate stress plus human pressure, that tipped the balance. Diseases may also have played a role, spreading more easily as species moved and populations became fragmented. Most likely it was not one single cause, but the convergence of many that spelled the end. What makes the loss of the giant striking is how quickly it happened in evolutionary terms. These animals had survived countless glacial cycles before, adapting to cold and warmth alike. Mammoths had endured for millions of years. Saber-toothed cats had thrived for just as long. Yet in the space of a few thousand years, a blink in geological time, they were gone. The difference this time was humans. Evolution had equipped mammoths to survive ice and snow, but not to withstand hunters armed with stone and cooperation. Lions could face wolves or bears, but they could not survive when their prey herds were steadily taken by human groups. Giants that had seemed eternal disappeared in the presence of a species that rewrote the rules of survival. For humans of that time, the end of the giants may not have felt dramatic. Change was gradual. Each generation may have noticed fewer mammoths, smaller herds of bison, or fewer sightings of saber-toothed cats, but life went on. People adapted by shifting their diets, hunting smaller game, fishing, and gathering more plants. The memory of giants lingered in stories and perhaps in art, but the daily reality was survival in a changing landscape. For us, looking back, the disappearance is monumental. For them, it may have been simply another turn in the endless cycle of adaptation. The legacy of the giants remains in the bones and tusks buried in the earth. Mammoth tusks, polished by human hands into tools or ornaments, carry both beauty and weight. Antlers of Irish elk, unearthed from bogs, stretch wider than most doorways. Glyptodon shells, still fused into domes, show the strange armour that once covered plains. Each fossil tells of a creature that dominated its world, then vanished when the balance shifted. Museums display them as reminders not only of what was lost, but of how fragile success can be, even for the largest and strongest. Yet not all giants were lost. Musk oxen, bison and reindeer endured. Elephants are living relatives of mammoths, carrying their legacy into today. Lions survived, though smaller in range and stature. The Ice Age left echoes in the animals still around us, reminders that survival sometimes comes not from being the biggest or the strongest, but from being the most adaptable. To stand on a plain today and imagine it filled with mammoth saber-toothed cats, dire wolves and giant sloths is to realise how much the world has changed in a short span of time. The end of the giants was not just an extinction event. It was a turning point, one where humans became the dominant force in ecosystems and where the landscapes of the past gave way to the ones we know now. When we look back at the bones and tusks left in frozen ground or buried in ancient bogs, one of the most persistent questions rises to the surface. Why did they vanish? The mammoths, mastodons, saber-toothed cats, giant sloths, glyptodons, and so many others. They had survived for hundreds of thousands, even millions of years, through countless cycles of cold and warmth. They had endured previous glacial advances and retreats. They were successful, abundant, and spread across continents. And yet, around 10,000 years ago, they were gone. The disappearance of the Ice Age megafauna is one of the great mysteries in natural history, and over the years several theories have been proposed to explain it. One of the strongest and most debated ideas is the role of human hunting. This is often called the overkill hypothesis. It suggests that when humans spread into new continents, they hunted the largest animals intensively, driving them to extinction. The argument points out that in places like North America, mammoths, mastodons, horses, camels, and giant ground sloths all vanished within just a few thousand years of humans arriving. In Australia, where humans arrived much earlier, giant marsupials and reptiles disappeared around the same time. The pattern looks like a trail. Wherever people appear, the giants vanish shortly afterward. Supporters of this theory argue that humans, armed with stone-tipped spears, fire and cooperative hunting strategies, were unlike any predator the megafauna had faced before. Animals that had evolved to withstand lions, wolves or bears had no defences against clever hunters who could coordinate and strike with precision. But overkill alone does not explain everything. In Eurasia, where humans and large animals had coexisted for tens of thousands of years, the extinctions were more gradual. Some species, like mammoths, persisted in pockets for thousands of years even after heavy hunting. That suggests hunting pressure alone cannot be the full explanation. It might have been a major factor in some regions, especially where animals were encountering humans for the first time, but it doesn't account for every extinction. Another major theory points to climate change. As the Ice Age ended, glaciers retreated, sea levels rose and habitats shifted dramatically. The vast steppe tundra ecosystems that had supported huge herds of grazing animals shrank as forests spread across much of Eurasia and North America. For animals like mammoths, which thrived on grasses and herbs, the change meant less food. For giant sloths and mastodons, forest shifts altered the plants they depended on. The warming also changed rainfall patterns, reduced the extent of cold-adapted vegetation, and increased competition for dwindling resources. Large animals, which required vast amounts of food to sustain themselves, were especially vulnerable. Their reproductive rates were slow, making it hard to recover from population declines. Some scientists argue that climate change alone could have caused many extinctions as it had in earlier times. Yet again, the timing complicates things. Mammoths, bison, and other animals had survived previous warmings and coolings. They had endured cycles of ice advancing and retreating for hundreds of thousands of years. Why would this particular warming at the end of the Pleistocene be different? This is where the overlap with humans becomes important. Perhaps climate change weakened populations by reducing food, while human hunting delivered the final blow. In this view, neither factor alone explains the extinctions, but together they created a perfect storm. Beyond hunting and climate, other theories have been proposed. One idea is disease. As humans and their domesticated animals spread, they may have carried pathogens that infected native wildlife. Large, slow-breeding animals could have been especially susceptible. A disease that spreads quickly could devastate herds already struggling with habitat changes. While this theory is harder to prove, since pathogens don't fossilize the way bones do, it remains a possibility. Diseases have shaped ecosystems many times in history, from the plague in human societies to rinderpest in African cattle and antelope. It's not impossible that something similar happened during the Ice Age. There is also the idea of ecological disruption. Large animals are ecosystem engineers, meaning they shape their environments in ways that affect countless other species. Mammoths and bison maintained open grasslands by grazing and trampling. Glyptodons may have shaped vegetation patterns. When these animals declined, ecosystems changed in response. Forests spread where grasslands had once been, altering conditions for all kinds of animals and plants. In this view, extinctions were not just about losing species, but about losing the very processes that sustained environments. Once those processes collapsed, the ecosystems could no longer support the same diversity of life. One of the more controversial theories is the impact hypothesis, which suggests that a comet or asteroid strike triggered sudden environmental changes around 12,800 years ago. Proponents point to layers of sediment containing unusual particles, such as nanodiamonds or microscopic spherules, which they argue could be evidence of a cosmic impact. Such an event could have sparked massive wildfires, altered climate abruptly, and stressed ecosystems already under strain. Critics argue the evidence is inconsistent and not conclusive. Whether or not such an impact occurred remains debated, but the theory adds another layer to the discussion. It's possible that the extinctions were not caused by a single factor at all, but by a combination of many. Climate change reduced habitats, human hunting added pressure, disease may have struck weakened populations, ecosystem disruptions compounded the effects. Together, these factors created cascading stresses that even the largest, strongest animals could not withstand. In this sense, the extinction of the Ice Age giants may have been the result of tipping points, small changes building until the balance of survival collapsed. When we look at the survivors, this becomes clearer. Bison endured, though in reduced numbers, because they reproduced more quickly and fed on a wide range of grasses. Musk oxen endured because of their resilience in the cold and their defensive herds. Reindeer adapted to forest and tundra alike. Smaller, more flexible animals often survived, while the giants, with their slower reproduction and narrower needs, vanished. Survival wasn't about size or strength, it was about adaptability. For humans, the disappearance of the giants changed the world in profound ways. Hunting shifted towards smaller animals, fishing became more important, and plant gathering expanded. Societies adjusted their strategies, and in doing so they ensured their own survival, even as the animals around them vanished. But in the process, humans became the first species to alter global ecosystems on a massive scale, setting the stage for the transformations that have continued ever since. Theories of extinction remind us that the past is rarely simple. No single explanation fits every case, and the truth is likely tangled, with multiple forces converging. The disappearance of the Ice Age giants wasn't just a biological event. It was an ecological, climatic, and human story all at once, written across continents in bones, tools, and landscapes. It shows us that survival depends on more than power, and that even the mightiest can fall when the balance shifts. When we think about the Ice Age, it often feels like an entirely separate world, filled with beasts so unlike anything alive today that they seem more like creatures from a myth than history. Mammoths marching across frozen plains, saber-toothed cats crouching in ambush, glyptodons lumbering under armoured shells, and sloths taller than houses slowly pulling down branches. And yet, the Ice Age is not as distant as it feels. Many of the animals that survived still carry pieces of that lost era, echoes that remind us every day that the world we live in was shaped by those giants. Their memory is carried in the living species that remain, in the landscapes they influenced, and even in the ways humans remember them in stories and bones. One of the clearest echoes lies in elephants. When people see an African or Asian elephant today, they are looking at the closest living relatives of mammoths and mastodons. The thick legs, the tusks, the social herds. All of these traits tie them directly to their Ice Age cousins. The mammoth may be gone, but its shape lives on in the elephant, and its legacy continues in the way elephants still act as ecosystem engineers. Just as mammoths once maintained open grasslands by grazing and trampling trees, elephants today shape savannas and forests by knocking down trees, digging waterholes, and dispersing seeds. They are living reminders that some of the roles played by Ice Age giants have not entirely vanished. Bison are another example. In North America, massive herds of bison once stretched across the plains, shaping grasslands much like their Ice Age ancestors had. The steppe bison that roamed during the Pleistocene was larger, with massive horns spreading wide, but its descendants survived and became the bison we know today. Even reduced in number by human activity in recent centuries, bison remain an echo of the Ice Age, moving across open ground in groups that recall the herds hunted by both dire wolves and early humans. Watching a modern bison herd thunder across a prairie gives a glimpse of what Ice Age landscapes must have felt like, when similar animals darkened horizons in their thousands. The muskox is perhaps the most striking survivor. Its shaggy coat, defensive circles, and resilience in extreme cold all tie it directly to the Pleistocene. Standing on the tundra today, a herd of muskoxen looks almost unchanged from the animals painted by Ice Age hunters on cave walls. Their survival in the harshest environments shows how strategies of endurance can outlast the most dramatic shifts in climate and ecosystem. They are not just echoes of the Ice Age, they are living fragments of it. Reindeer too carry that legacy. They remain widespread across Arctic and subarctic regions, still migrating in massive herds across tundra landscapes. In Ice Age Europe and Asia, reindeer were central to human survival, providing meat, hides, and antlers. And today, domesticated reindeer still sustain cultures in northern latitudes, connecting present-day people to a relationship that began tens of thousands of years ago. The bond between humans and reindeer is a living thread woven straight through time, an echo of survival strategies shared between species. Even smaller animals, less dramatic than mammoths or lions, carry the Ice Age into the present. Armadillos, small relatives of glyptodons, scuttle across the Americas, armoured in miniature compared to their giant cousins. Beavers, while tiny compared to the bear-sized castoroids, still transform landscapes with dams and lodges, echoing the wetland engineers that once swam in Pleistocene lakes. Big cats like lions and leopards are reduced in range, but they still remind us of the cave lions and Ice Age predators that once held even greater territories. Each of these species holds a piece of that vanished puzzle, small but significant reminders that extinction did not erase everything. The echoes are not only biological but ecological. The disappearance of mammoths, mastodons, and other giants reshaped ecosystems in ways still visible today. In Siberia, the absence of mammoths allowed forests to spread into areas once kept open as grassland. Some scientists believe that if mammoths had survived, much of that region would still be open steppe. This idea has led to modern experiments like Pleistocene Park in Russia, where researchers are trying to recreate steppe ecosystems by reintroducing bison, musk oxen, and horses, hoping to see if landscapes respond as they did thousands of years ago. The project is, in itself, an echo, an attempt to revive the processes once driven by Ice Age giants. Human culture carries echoes as well. Cave paintings, carved figurines, and ancient myths keep those animals alive in memory. The stories of giant beasts in many indigenous traditions may preserve glimpses of encounters with mammoths, mastodons, or giant sloths. Even today, the fascination with these creatures shows how deeply they resonate with us. Museums display mammoth skeletons, Irish elk antlers, or saber-toothed skulls, and crowds gather in awe, feeling a connection across time to animals that no human alive has ever seen. They live on not just in bones, but in imagination. Some echoes are even louder now with the rise of science and technology. DNA extracted from frozen mammoth remains has fueled discussions of de-extinction. The idea of bringing mammoths, or something very much like them, back to life. While these projects are still experimental, they highlight just how strongly the memory of the Ice Age continues to pull on us. We imagine not only what was lost, but what could be revived, as if part of us longs to step back into that world filled with giants. The landscapes themselves bear traces. In Alaska and Siberia, permafrost still holds the bones, tusks, and sometimes entire bodies of mammoths and bison. Rivers and melting ice reveal them, preserved for thousands of years, reminders that the Ice Age is not buried so deep after all. Farmers in Siberia still find mammoth tusks in fields, and some communities have long traditions of carving them. These remains are both resources and echoes, bridging past and present in tangible ways. Even in modern animals that are not direct survivors, the spirit of the Ice Age lingers. The elephant shrew, the antelope, the bear, each carries evolutionary ties that stretch back to that time. The Ice Age was not a separate chapter sealed off from the present. It was part of the ongoing story of life, and many of the characters remain on stage. When we look closely, we see that the world around us is filled with whispers of that lost age. For humans, the echoes are perhaps the strongest of all. Our ancestors lived through the Ice Age, hunted its animals, painted its caves, and adapted to its harshness. The tools, the fire, the cooperation that sustained them became the foundation of our species' success. Every time we gather around firelight, tell stories in the dark, or carve objects with meaning, we are repeating patterns that began in that cold world. The Ice Age lives on not only in animals, but in us, in the ways we learn to survive and in the culture that survival created. To notice these echoes is to realize that the Ice Age never fully ended. It remains present in the animals that adapted and survived, in the bones preserved beneath ice, in the human traditions that still honor those connections. The giants may be gone, but their influence lingers in every elephant, every reindeer migration, every muskox herd huddled against the wind. The world we live in carries their fingerprints, subtle but unmistakable, reminders that we share a history with creatures larger, stranger, and more powerful than most of what we see today. Looking back across the sweep of the Ice Age, it's difficult not to be struck by how strange and immense that world really was. A single landscape could hold creatures so different from anything we know today that it almost seems impossible they all shared the same ground. Woolly mammoths trudging across frozen plains, saber-toothed cats crouching in the grass, giant sloths pulling down branches, dire wolves prowling at the edges of firelight, and humans watching it all unfold, carrying spears and embers as their tools of survival. For hundreds of thousands of years, this was the stage of life, a place where size, endurance, and cleverness were tested constantly against cold, scarcity, and one another. And though so many of those creatures are gone, their presence has never really left. The bones they left behind are more than fossils. They are reminders of lives lived, of struggles endured, of worlds shaped by animal movements and human decisions. Every tusk and antler, every skull and footprint pressed into ancient mud is a kind of story. Some of those stories tell of resilience, muskoxen forming circles to defend calves, reindeer herds crossing rivers in migration, camels enduring cold steppe winds. Others tell of drama, predators locked in hunts, mammoths clashing tusks, people driving bison into traps. Together they weave a picture of a time when Earth was filled with creatures that seem larger than life, but were in truth simply life itself, adapted to a world of ice. It's easy to wonder what it would have been like to stand in that world, to look out across a plain and see herds stretching to the horizon, predators lurking in the distance, and humans gathered at the edge of it all, aware that survival hung on every choice. The sounds alone would have been overwhelming. The trumpeting of mammoths, the howls of wolves, the groaning calls of giant sloths, the crackle of fire in a wind that cut across open ground. To live then would have meant facing danger at every turn, but also experiencing a richness of life that has no parallel today. And yet, in many ways, we do stand in that world still, not in the exact same forms, not with the same giants walking among us, but in the echoes of their existence. Every elephant that knocks down a tree is repeating the role of mammoths. Every herd of bison across the plains is a living thread from steppe bison ancestors. Every muskox standing firm against the wind carries the ice age into our own time. Even the stories we tell of monsters, of great beasts, of survival against overwhelming odds, bear the imprint of those animals. They live on in myth and imagination as much as in DNA and bone. There's a lesson in that continuity. The Ice Age wasn't simply a lost chapter, a closed book we can only peer into from the outside. It's part of an ongoing story, one that shaped us as much as it shaped the animals we shared it with. Humans did not just enter the Ice Age, we were forged in it. Our ability to make tools, to tame fire, to work together, to imagine and create, all of that sharpened under the pressure of living in a world filled with dangers and opportunities. The humans who painted animals on cave walls or buried their dead with care were not distant strangers. They were us at an earlier stage, already carrying the qualities that define our species today. The disappearance of the giants is still a sobering part of that story. It reminds us that success in nature is fragile, that even the largest animals can fall when conditions shift and pressures mount. Climate change, human hunting, and ecological disruption combine to erase species that had seemed eternal. It is a reminder, too, of the influence people can have on the world around them. Long before cities, long before industry, humans were already reshaping ecosystems and altering the course of life on Earth. That power is something we still hold, and the responsibility that comes with it is greater than ever. At the same time, the survival of certain animals shows another side of the story. Bison, muskoxen, reindeer, and elephants endured, not because they were the biggest or the most dramatic, but because they carried traits that allowed them to adapt. They could reproduce faster, tolerate harsher diets, or live in tighter-knit groups. They remind us that survival is often about flexibility, about persistence, about making the best of what remains when conditions grow hard. Their presence today is a link that ties us directly to the past, showing that not all of the Ice Age is gone. The echoes of the Ice Age also live in landscapes. Permafrost still holds mammoth bones, peat bogs still cradle Irish elk antlers, lakes still preserve the skeletons of giant beavers. These places are not just sites of discovery, they are time capsules keeping pieces of that world intact so that we can glimpse it and learn from it. Each discovery adds another thread to the story, another reminder that the past is closer than it sometimes feels. Standing in a museum, looking at the skeleton of a mammoth, or the shell of a glyptodon, we can feel that closeness. These are not abstract relics. They are the remains of animals that lived, breathed and moved across real ground. Animals that were watched by humans with the same eyes we use today. The awe we feel at their size or strangeness is the same awe our ancestors felt, standing on cold plains as herds pass by. The difference is that we see them as vanished, while our ancestors saw them as neighbours, as food, as rivals, as figures to be respected and remembered. Closing reflections on the Ice Age are less about endings and more about connections. We live in a world without mammoths or saber-toothed cats, but we also live in a world shaped by them. The The grasslands, forests and tundras around us were influenced by their presence and by their disappearance. The animals that survived still carry their shadows. The people we are today were shaped by the challenges of living among them. The Ice Age doesn't sit apart from history. It runs through it, like a cold wind that still lingers in the cracks of time. And so, when we think about the giants that ruled during the Ice Age, it isn't only with nostalgia for what was lost, it's also with recognition of what remains and of the lessons their story carries into our time. The Ice Age shows us that change is constant, that survival is a matter of resilience, and that humans have always been agents of transformation. It shows us that life is both fragile and persistent, capable of producing creatures of astonishing size and power, yet vulnerable to the smallest shifts in climate or pressure. It shows us that our own story is deeply entangled with the animals we live beside, hunted, painted, and remembered. To walk forward with those reflections is to see the world differently. To see elephants not just as modern animals, but as living links to mammoths. To see reindeer migrations as the continuation of patterns tens of thousands of years old. To see our own firelight and stories as echoes of campsites long since vanished beneath ice and soil. The giants may be gone, but they are not silent. They speak in the wind over tundra, in the shadows of bones in the shape of survivors, and in the imagination that keeps them alive.